Helen Milner was born around 1964 in New Zealand to Anne Milner. Anne often shared how challenging it was to raise Helen, who was a difficult child from a young age. By the age of 10, Helen had already begun causing serious trouble, a pattern that continued throughout her life. Anne kept a list documenting Helen's misdeeds, which included serious incidents. Helen attended high school in Christchurch, the largest city on New Zealand's South Island, known for its English heritage. Despite being in a reputable school, Helen engaged in theft from her classmates and withdrew substantial sums of money from her mother's bank account. Although her mother decided against pressing charges and her peers did not report her to the authorities, the school eventually expelled her. Concerned about her future, her mother enrolled her in Ritchie Secretarial College. After graduating, Helen worked as a typist but was dismissed after presenting a falsified letter from the Ministry of Health, which supposedly allowed smoking in the staff room. She then took a job as a cashier at United Building Society, a New Zealand construction society, but was fired for stealing money. Once again, her mother covered the stolen amount and spent thousands to keep her out of court and prison. Despite these efforts, Helen continued on a troubled path. She had moved to Wellington with a fiancé, but the relationship ended badly, leaving her in debt and returning to Christchurch. Money remained an issue. Helen often took advantage of her family, stealing from her disabled aunt and her father's wallet. In her early 20s, Helen met Mark Robert Kearns and they married around 1987, having 2 sons, Greg and Adam. Their marriage ended in a bitter divorce in the mid-1990s, marked by a fierce custody battle. According to Mark, Helen was manipulative and motivated by money or personal gain, showing no empathy. She allegedly lied in family court to gain custody and told the children that their father had moved to Australia and did not want to see them. Despite spending over $20,000 on lawyers, Mark struggled to maintain contact with his children until they were old enough to visit him independently, by which time their relationship was severely strained. Details of Helen's life after the divorce are unclear until 2005 when she married Philip Nisbet. Phil was born on March 20th, 1962. He was the eldest of 4 siblings. As the eldest, Phil was always protective and caring towards his siblings, especially his youngest sister. At some point, the Nisbets moved to Australia, but Phil chose to stay in New Zealand. He worked as a truck driver, a demanding but reasonably well-paid job. He was married to a woman named Vicky, with whom he had his eldest son, Zach. After their separation, he formed a relationship with Karen, which produced his younger son, Ben. This relationship also ended, leaving Phil single again as he entered his 40s. The specifics of how Phil and Helen met remain unclear, but it is evident that both had experienced failed marriages and had children from previous relationships. Their happiness together was well documented in family photos shared on social media, showing them smiling and evidently in love. They got married in 2005. Initially, everything seemed perfect, and their families were pleased to see them rebuilding their lives. However, not everything was flawless, and like any couple, they had their difficulties. Even Helen's family blamed her for generating conflicts, as Phil avoided confrontations. Helen and her sister-in-law, Leigh Ann, had a falling out in 2006, leading to a permanent rift. There are 2 versions of the story behind their disagreement. One version suggests that Leigh Ann's teenage son, Lance, had stayed with Phil and Helen, and after an incident that upset Helen, she called her sister-in-law to complain, resulting in an argument. The other version claims that Lance reported to his mother about a nefarious plan that his Uncle Phil was allegedly plotting under Helen's influence to harm his ex-partner Karen. Leigh Ann confronted Phil about the absurd plan and took her son out of Phil's house. Despite this, Leigh Ann continued to love her brother but regretted the distance that grew between them. Although things seemed fine, or at least Phil thought so, Helen had grown tired of the relationship. She spoke ill of him behind his back and complained about not being free. Sometimes, she openly fantasized in front of her co-workers about becoming a widow. However, she never mentioned divorce. On April 15, 2009, Phil fainted at work and was taken to the hospital. Doctors were unsure of the cause but suspected an allergic reaction to a spider or insect bite during a recent visit to Australia for his birthday. His condition improved and he was sent home, but that night, he fell ill again. Helen informed her younger son that she would take Phil back to the hospital. In the days that followed, Adam spoke to Phil about something odd he had noticed the night Phil's condition worsened. He told Phil that his mother had been holding some empty capsules and tried to hide them from view. Despite being Helen's son, Adam warned his stepfather to be cautious, suggesting that his mother might poison him. Phil, trusting and unwilling to believe such a thing, reassured Adam that he had nothing to worry about and must have been mistaken. This incident was the final straw for Adam, who moved out the next day, unwilling to remain in a toxic environment. For about 3 weeks, life returned to normal, with everyone going about their routines without health issues. On May 3, 2009, Phil, a loving father, texted his younger son Ben before bed, informing him that he had washed his hoodie and would bring it to him the next day. However, Phil did not wake up that morning. On May 4, 2009, Helen called the police, reporting that her husband Phil was dead in their home. The police responded quickly as it was a slow day with an available patrol. Helen, in tears, opened the door and led the officers to the master bedroom, where they found Phil's body lying diagonally on the bed, eyes open and not breathing. The officers noticed 2 empty packets of pills and a half-empty glass of water on the nightstand. Helen's crying intensified, but something about her made the officers keep their distance. They called their superiors to report the scene and notify Phil's family. With the phone in her hand, Helen reported that her husband had taken his own life and that she had evidence to prove it. The police took the phone and saw a message on the screen, seemingly sent by Phil. The message expressed Phil's sorrow, stating he couldn't go on, that he loved her very much, and asked her to take care of herself and tell Ben that he loved him. The message was dated May 3rd and sent at 10:30 p.m. The lead officer on the scene was notified of everything that transpired during their investigation. Meanwhile, Phil's body was taken to the morgue in hopes that the autopsy would shed light on the situation. Leigh Ann described the moment she received the call from her father, informing her that Phil had ended his life as terrible. Despite not speaking to her brother much over the past 2 years due to her argument with Helen, she never imagined Phil would make such a drastic decision. Days later, when the preliminary autopsy report was released, it was revealed that Phil's body contained high levels of an anti-allergic drug that paradoxically caused him a severe allergic reaction. At that moment, Leigh Ann felt she had to accept that her brother had decided to end it all, but something in her spirit rebelled against this notion. From then on, significant events unfolded, but the police seemed fixated on the idea that Phil's death was self-inflicted, causing delays in the investigation. Then, something almost unheard of in criminal cases occurred. The perpetrator's own family accused her. On May 13th, the couple's relatives went to the police station. They expressed their suspicions that Helen had tried to kill her husband 3 weeks before the fatal outcome. However, this lead was not immediately pursued. Another notable event was that during May, Helen began exchanging text messages with an ex-boyfriend named Barry. Surprisingly, Barry moved into the home Helen and her recently deceased husband had shared just a few weeks later. By this time, Leigh Ann had re-established contact with Helen, as Phil's death necessitated conversations and reconciliation. In one of their talks, Helen mentioned a farewell letter that Phil had left, which she found when she opened the safe. She read the letter and promised to show it to Leigh Ann when they met in person. A little over a month after her brother's death, Leigh Ann flew from Australia to New Zealand for two reasons. One was to celebrate her son's 21st birthday, and the other was to discreetly investigate Phil's death. Helen offered her a place to stay, and she accepted. The night of her arrival, Helen greeted her with a vodka glass in one hand and the supposed farewell note in the other, typed on office paper and signed with Phil scribbled at the bottom. Leigh Ann immediately thought it didn't look like her brother's signature but remained silent, focusing on the letter's content. Phil claimed he had discovered that Ben was not his biological son and could not face him again. Additionally, Helen mentioned finding a small black book Phil supposedly kept, detailing affairs with other women and a guide on becoming a gigolo. Though angered by the negative image Helen was trying to paint of her brother, Leigh Ann had to pretend not to arouse suspicion. She said she disapproved of Phil's decision to take his own life and would go to bed to be in good condition for the next day when the family would gather at a restaurant to celebrate Lance's 21st birthday. That day, when Helen returned from work, she was furious, carrying the mail in her hand. Karen, Ben's mother, had written to request Ben's belongings from the house and some money Phil had left for his younger son. Filled with rage, Helen declared she would put Karen in her place, claiming Ben wasn't Phil's son and announcing that they would not be attending Lance's birthday celebration. Although Leigh Ann disagreed with Helen's behavior, she chose to remain silent, not wanting to provoke her. She needed to stay close and observe everything she could as she continued to suspect foul play in her brother's death. That evening, Barry, Helen's new boyfriend, dropped off the two women at the restaurant where they would celebrate Lance's birthday. Upon arriving, they met Zach, Phil's eldest son, who was with Vicky, his mother, and her partner. Helen was extremely courteous to them, even inviting Zach to her house the following weekend to sort through his father's belongings and take what he wanted. Leigh Ann later remarked that she could hardly focus on Lance's celebration with everything happening before her eyes. She couldn't understand why Ben was treated so poorly while Zach was offered his father's possessions. It also struck her as odd that Ben was mentioned in Phil's last messages, but Zach was not. She suspected that Phil had not taken his own life and that Helen had written the notes to sow discord between the brothers, but she couldn't prove it. Before returning to Australia, Leigh Ann went to the police and provided all this information. She found it suspicious that Helen was already living with her new boyfriend in the house she had shared with Phil. Following the accusations from Helen's own family and Leigh Ann's statements, the police requested Helen to provide the supposed farewell note from her husband. She submitted it on July 6, 2009, but notably, Phil's scrawled signature was missing. Meanwhile, Helen's relationship with Barry was progressing rapidly. On July 12, 2009, he gifted her a gold ring with a diamond worth over $2,000. Helen wore it proudly on her ring finger but insisted it was not an engagement ring, as Barry had not proposed when he gave it to her. Throughout 2009, Helen continued her deceitful ways. Between January and September, she had been stealing from her employer, although no one knew at the time. At the beginning of 2010, amid multiple requests from Phil's family to clarify the circumstances of his death, the police summoned Helen for another statement. On January 30th, she made her second statement, and by then, her depiction of an ideal marriage from her first interview had changed significantly. She told the detective that she never claimed her husband was a good man. When asked about the note explaining his decision, she stated that the police had found it in his briefcase and that the handwritten signature resembled Phil's writing. The investigator reminded her that the letter she submitted to the station had no signature. Helen quickly responded that she had kept a copy and hadn't looked at it for so long that she mistakenly believed it was signed. Helen also expressed that Phil's family had turned against her, claiming it was unfair. Known for her vengeful nature, in March 2010, she bought a mobile phone and sent herself threatening messages, pretending they were from her son Adam. This was her way of retaliating after learning he had backed his grandmother when alerting the police about how dangerous Helen could be. She accused Adam of sending death threats to his ex-girlfriend, suggesting he had violated a restraining order, and claimed he was extremely aggressive, making her fear for her safety. Due to these serious allegations from his mother, Adam was detained for over 15 days until it was revealed that everything was a fabrication of Helen's twisted mind. Helen's luck seemed to turn in late 2010. In October, she was sentenced to 5 months of house arrest after being found guilty of stealing from her employer between January and September 2009. Concurrently, Leigh Ann's persistence bore fruit, leading to a forensic investigation into Phil's death starting in November 2010. Leigh Ann had requested permission to review some evidence for the court case, and it was granted. Leigh Ann brought a folder of documents with Phil's signature for comparison with the farewell letter. The judge showed her and her brother the letter. Leigh Ann practically snatched it from the judge's hand upon seeing it lacked the signature, displaying her anger and disappointment at what she saw as another of Helen's attempts to evade responsibility. The subsequent court investigation highlighted the police's failings in investigating Phil's death, Helen's history of law violations, and mounting evidence that Phil had not taken his own life but was a victim of foul play. On the stand, Helen described her husband as very nervous and easily agitated, recounting their trip to Australia in March 2009 for Phil's birthday. During that trip, he had been bitten by an insect, taken a low dose of Phenergan, and remained unconscious for at least 6 hours, discovering his severe allergy to the medication. Helen added that the day before his death, they had a pleasant time shopping, having lunch and discussing future projects for the house. They had dinner, watched TV, and Phil showered and went to bed around 9:30 p.m. According to Helen, she joined him an hour later, kissed him goodnight, and went to sleep. The investigation in court lasted 6 months, with various pieces of evidence presented and thoroughly analyzed. On May 12, 2011, the judge presented her conclusions, stating there was insufficient evidence to prove Phil intended to take his own life. This conclusion paved the way for a homicide investigation. The investigators took an immediate interest in the case and launched a murder inquiry that lasted several months. On October 27, 2011, Helen was arrested and charged with murder and attempted murder. In the meantime, Helen continued facing legal repercussions for her other actions. In August 2012, she was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in prison for sending herself insulting text messages, pretending they were from her son. In March 2010, she was denied parole. The murder trial began on December 12, 2013. The Crown's prosecution spent 2 weeks presenting evidence from over 70 witnesses, asserting that Helen attempted to kill her husband twice, succeeding on the second attempt, using doses of the anti-allergy and sedative drug Phenergan. The motive was believed to be financial, as Helen intended to claim Phil's $250,000 life insurance policy. The financial advisor who sold the policy to the couple in 2008 testified that Phil was present when the policy was purchased, but he suspected Helen filled out the entire form on her husband's behalf. It was also revealed that the insurance policy had a 13-month exclusion clause for voluntary death, which expired in March 2009, just before Helen's alleged attempts on Phil's life. The Crown recounted Helen's purchase of the medication to which Phil was allergic, using false names and addresses. They suggested she mixed the drug into Phil's food and, after he was sedated, suffocated him. She then manipulated the scene, sending the fake farewell text and writing the typed note. A DNA test confirmed that the claim about Ben not being Phil's biological son was false. Colleagues of Helen testified that she frequently talked about poisons and her desire to suffocate her husband. A pivotal moment in the trial was Adam's testimony. He recalled visiting the police station with his grandmother on May 13, 2009, after Helen had expressed her desire to kill Phil and even suggested hiring a hitman. When Adam asked why she didn't divorce Phil instead, Helen responded that she didn't want to lose half of the house. Adam recounted seeing his mother in the kitchen on April 15, 2009, with 2 transparent capsules filled with a pale blue powder, which she nervously hid when he noticed. She claimed Phil had a headache. That night, Helen took Phil to the hospital, and the next day, Adam warned his stepfather about what he had seen, but Phil dismissed his concerns. The first officer on the scene noted that Helen's prolonged emotional display seemed unnatural. He and his colleague found it suspicious that the farewell text was discovered precisely when they were at the house. Helen's explanation that she stayed in bed with Phil until 2 a.m., then moved to the sofa after taking insulin, was also dubious, as Phil's body was positioned in a way that made it unlikely she had been beside him. Additionally, the farewell text was sent at 10:30 p.m., contradicting her timeline. In court, it was revealed that Helen's mother had written a letter requesting Helen's removal from her will and had accompanied Adam to the police to report Phil's suspected murder. Anne's letter stated that she finally faced the truth about her daughter, describing Helen as either mentally ill or simply evil. The defense maintained that Phil had taken his own life and argued that the Crown's case was based on orchestrated and arbitrary evidence. The Crown presented a circumstantial but solid case, while the defense lawyer warned against convicting Helen based on what he considered subjective evidence. The police admitted initial investigative failings, stating the case should have been treated as a homicide from the start. A jury of 7 men and 5 women deliberated for half a day before rejecting the defense's claim that Phil had taken his own life. They found Helen guilty of murder, but not guilty of attempted murder. Helen, then 50, reacted calmly as the jury delivered their verdict. In February 2014, the sentencing hearing for Helen took place at the Christchurch High Court. The judge addressed Helen directly, stating that she committed the crime purely for financial gain, and because she wanted to rid herself of a husband she no longer desired in her life. He added that her actions were even more reprehensible because Phil was an exceptionally kind man who had given her no reason to take his life. The judge agreed with the Crown's assertion that Helen's actions were calculated and cold, describing them as a meticulously planned and executed scheme with cruel disregard for Phil's family and friends. Ultimately, Helen was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 17 years before being eligible for parole, for causing Phil's death in 2009 to claim a $250,000 life insurance payout. One of the consequences of the trial was the tarnishing of the police's reputation for initially adhering to the idea of a self-inflicted fatal injury despite indicators of foul play. The media highlighted this issue, which the public deemed crucial. Reports revealed an internal document exposing fundamental flaws in the initial investigation. After the sentencing, Mark Kearns, Helen's first husband, broke his silence, stating that Helen nearly destroyed his relationship with their children. He said he was trying to rebuild his bond with Greg, 25, and Adam, 23, understanding the need to move past the past. Adam, who had filed a civil lawsuit against his mother for falsely accusing him of harassment, won the case in 2014. He argued that Helen's actions caused him pain, distress, humiliation, and financial loss due to his unjust 15-day imprisonment. Helen was ordered to pay Adam Kearns $55,000. However, Helen's impact on Adam's life led to further legal troubles. He faced charges for cannabis sale and illegal possession of a shotgun and appeared in the media for assaulting Justin Marshall, a former New Zealand Super Rugby champion from the early 2000s. Leigh Ann's persistence ensured that Phil's murder did not go unpunished. After the intense legal battle, she, a single mother of 4 living in Australia, wrote a book about the case, published in 2016. By then, she had also started studying criminology and justice at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, hoping to work in the criminal justice system to improve the arduous and stressful path for other victims. Rachel Moran was born on January 17, 1981, in England, and was the youngest of 4 siblings, having 2 sisters and 1 brother. They all lived together in their hometown. From an early age, Rachel developed a keen interest in music and dance, particularly ballet. She excelled academically in school and later attended a local college to study information technology. However, she eventually decided to focus on her passion for dance. In college, Rachel met a young man named Mark, and they soon started dating. They decided to move in together and rented an apartment in a quiet residential area, which was only a kilometer away from Rachel's parents' home, allowing her to visit them frequently. Rachel also found a job at a local bakery, where she enjoyed decorating cakes. This experience sparked her interest in pursuing a culinary education. In December 2002, when Rachel was 21, she and Mark adopted 2 kittens. They were both very attentive to the pets, ensuring they were never left alone for long periods. As a result, Rachel and Mark always planned their activities to ensure someone was home to care for the animals. This included their New Year's Eve plans, where Mark was to visit his parents and return in the evening, while Rachel planned to go to a bar with her brother to celebrate. On the night of December 31st, Rachel met up with her brother, and they went to a bar, joined by some friends. After midnight, Rachel and her brother left the bar and arrived at their parents' house around 1:20 a.m. Before going to bed, Rachel decided to call Mark to check on him but found he was not home. She reached him on his mobile phone, and he informed her that he was at a party with friends. Disappointed that Mark had left the house and the kittens alone, Rachel decided to go back to their apartment instead of staying at her parents' house. Her mother tried to dissuade her from leaving due to the late hour and concerns for her safety, even though the apartment was only a kilometer away. After a long discussion, Rachel left for home, promising to call her mother upon arrival. However, after waiting for about an hour and a half without receiving a call, Rachel's mother tried to reach her both on her mobile phone and at the apartment but got no response. Rachel Moran's mother grew increasingly worried when she could not reach her daughter, suspecting that Rachel might have gone to the party where her boyfriend was and hence was not answering the calls. After trying to contact her until 4:30 a.m., the mother decided to go to sleep. She woke up around 10 a.m. and found her husband on the phone, hoping he was talking to Rachel. However, it was their eldest daughter on the line, who had been unable to reach Rachel all morning and was very worried. Realizing that Rachel had not returned home, the family began to panic. They tried calling her again, and after some time, Mark answered. He was surprised when asked if Rachel was home. He said he had returned around 7 a.m. and found that Rachel wasn't there. Assuming she had stayed at her parents' house, he didn't think much of it and went to sleep. According to Mark, there were no signs that Rachel had been in the apartment. Her belongings were not there. The bed was as he left it, and the kittens had not been fed. This escalated the family's panic. The family called Rachel's friends and other relatives, but no one had seen her that night. Subsequently, Rachel's parents decided to inform the police. Although Rachel was almost 22 years old and the police might typically wait before starting a search for a missing adult, they decided to begin the search immediately in this case. They inspected her apartment and interviewed all her family members and friends. The police quickly ruled out the possibility that Rachel had left of her own free will, given her background and the accounts of her loved ones. During the investigation, Rachel's mother recalled a moment from the night Rachel disappeared. When Rachel was leaving for her apartment, they had a discussion literally at the doorstep, standing with the door open as her mother tried to convince her to stay. At one point, an unknown man passed by the street. Rachel's mother even considered asking him to accompany her daughter home, but decided against it. After receiving a basic description of the man seen near Rachel Moran's location, the police began searching for him as he was headed in the same direction as Rachel shortly after her departure. This individual might have witnessed something relevant. Police units were alerted while the search for other clues continued. Investigators started scrutinizing Mark, Rachel's boyfriend. First, it was discovered that there had been an argument between them that night when Rachel found out he had gone to a party. Secondly, during his interactions with the police, Mark did not appear distressed despite his girlfriend's disappearance. These factors led the investigators to consider the possibility of his involvement in her disappearance, prompting them to verify his alibi. Mark stated he returned from the party after 6 a.m. The police confirmed his statement by speaking with people present at the party. Rachel's relatives also insisted that Mark would never harm her. Investigators requested Rachel's mobile operator and bank data and found that she had not used her phone or bank card since her disappearance. At that time, mobile phone geolocation tracking and cellular tower data were not sophisticated enough to be useful, especially over short distances. The police decided to obtain all surveillance camera recordings within a 10-kilometer radius of her route. Patrols were dispatched to each store, and residents in these areas were interviewed, hoping someone might have security cameras installed. Soon, they spotted Rachel on one of the cameras, just a few hundred meters from her residential complex, confirming she was heading home and not elsewhere. The search was intensified in this area, involving search dogs, helicopters, and dozens of officers combing streets, fields, and bodies of water. Streams and artificial channels were drained in the search, but these efforts yielded no results. As time passed, the police increasingly suspected that Rachel might no longer be alive, but the search continued on a larger scale. 2 weeks later, a concerning clue emerged. One of the channels near Rachel's apartment was drained, and her shoe, which she had worn when leaving her mother's house, was found. The following day, a trash bag was discovered in the same channel, containing a woman's purse with cosmetics, a mobile phone, and other items, including Rachel Moran's passport. These findings led Rachel's family and the investigators to believe she was probably deceased, and the police continued scouring the channels. There was a possibility that an unknown perpetrator had disposed of Rachel's body there, but further searches led to no additional discoveries. In the subsequent days, detectives dedicated even more effort to the case, deciding to resort to a popular tactic in England. The police found a woman who resembled Rachel Moran and dressed her in clothes similar to those Rachel wore on the night of her disappearance. They asked her to follow the same route Rachel took, and this reenactment was recorded and broadcast on local television channels. The purpose of this experiment was to find witnesses who might have seen Rachel on the night she disappeared but didn't think much of it, or had simply forgotten. The visual recreation of the scene was successful in jogging memories, and several people contacted the police with their observations after the broadcast. While these testimonies were ultimately not very helpful to the case, the detectives did gain some significant leads. In addition to witnesses, owners of surveillance cameras in the area also approached the police. Initially, the police had received most of these recordings, but some had been overlooked and proved to be fruitful. The administration of a school located about 150 meters from Rachel's apartment provided footage from the night in question. The quality was poor, but the police saw a woman heading towards the apartment complex and, seconds later, someone following her. They suspected this individual might be the unknown offender who could have attacked Rachel. However, the poor quality of the footage prevented identification of any distinguishing features. The police theorized that if the person responsible for Rachel's disappearance was this individual, they couldn't have transported her body too far without a car. They assumed the perpetrator lived in the area and decided to attempt to search every house within a 2-kilometer radius. This required residents' permission and considerable time, so over 100 officers were involved, knocking on doors and requesting to inspect properties. The search began on January 28th, with officers divided into groups, each accompanied by a specialist in property inspection. Hours into the search, one of the teams encountered something alarming at the last unit. The police were allowed inside by a man who answered the door, but initially found nothing suspicious. Before leaving, an officer noticed a small closet used for storing garbage, which was locked. The man couldn't recall where the key was, but eventually found it. When the officers opened the closet, they discovered numerous trash bags, empty boxes, and other objects. As they cleared the clutter, an officer noticed a human foot in one of the bags. Upon further inspection, they realized they had found the body of Rachel Moran. Wrapped in a blanket and tightly squeezed into the closet, which was very low, the officers were astounded at how the criminal managed to fit a human body in there. They immediately arrested the apartment owner, 23-year-old Michael Little, and his friend who was present during the visit. Little reacted calmly to his arrest, while his friend was shocked and confused about why they were being detained. After the arrest, the officers called the chief detective and waited for his arrival. They took Little's friend to the station while Little remained in the apartment with an officer, waiting for the next team. The officer decided to engage Little in conversation, and to his surprise, Little almost immediately began confessing in detail. Little expressed relief at being found, saying he had long wanted to tell someone. He narrated the sequence of events leading to the girl's death, but the officer found his version dubious. According to Little, on New Year's Eve, he saw Rachel on the street, approached her and talked to her, offering to go to his apartment. Rachel agreed, and they went to his place where they drank a bit. Then they argued over something unspecified. Little claimed he went to another room and, upon returning to the kitchen, found Rachel with her back to him, holding a knife. When she turned towards him and cut his hand, he panicked, grabbed a kitchen knife, and struck her, causing her death. The officer doubted the truthfulness of this story, as it seemed quite illogical. Nevertheless, he recorded Little's confession, and Little was soon taken to the station. During the interrogation, Little maintained his claim of self-defense. When asked why he didn't call the police, Little said he was scared and thought no one would believe him, so he decided to hide the body in his closet. Further investigation into Little's background revealed a significant criminal history. From a young age, he was caught stealing and committing other minor offenses. He was expelled from school several times, failing to obtain even a basic education. Little barely worked, stayed at home, and consumed alcohol and drugs. His acquaintances mentioned that Little often fantasized about meeting different women. He once even claimed he was dating a very tall and beautiful blonde girl. Although Little's friends knew he was not actually in any relationship, this detail caught the detective's attention. Rachel matched the description of the type of woman Little often fantasized about, approximately the same height and blonde hair. The detectives hypothesized that Little might have chosen Rachel as his victim based on these characteristics. They also established that Rachel did not know Little, despite living on nearby streets. The investigators reconstructed the timeline of that night and found that Little had been with his friends on the evening of December 31st, preparing to celebrate the new year. However, Little left their company in a rage because the girl he was trying to flirt with had left with his friend. He then headed to another party and left shortly after midnight, following a route that intersected with Rachel's path. Upon reviewing all available facts, the detectives came to an alarming conclusion. They recalled the stranger who passed by Rachel and her mother while the latter was pleading with her daughter not to walk home alone. The police suspected that this man was Little, a theory indirectly confirmed by surveillance camera footage. The recording showed a man resembling Little passing by shortly before Rachel, and in a subsequent recording, an unknown man was seen walking behind her. If this man was Little, he must have stopped somewhere to wait for Rachel to pass and then began following her. This scenario contradicted Little's own story. Further contradictions emerged after medical experts presented their report. Rachel's body had 27 stab wounds inflicted with great force, and she had no defensive wounds, contrary to Little's claim of a fight between them. Additionally, some of the wounds were inflicted from behind and no cuts were found on Little's hands. These facts unequivocally indicated that his story did not match reality. Based on all the available data, the detectives formulated a more plausible version of events. On that night, Little, feeling spurned from being rejected at the first party, passed by Rachel's mother's house. Hearing part of their conversation, he understood that Rachel would be walking home alone. She fit the type of woman he fantasized about, so he decided to attack her or try to talk to her. He advanced a bit, stepped off the main street and waited for Rachel to pass, then began following her. The situation could have developed in two scenarios. Either he attacked her immediately or attempted to flirt with her. In the scenario where Rachel might have ignored Little and walked away, there were several reasons for this. Firstly, she had a boyfriend. Secondly, she would not go to the home of a stranger who approached her on the street in the middle of the night. And thirdly, Rachel was very concerned about her kittens. Upon learning that her boyfriend had left them alone all night, she was focused on getting home as quickly as possible. The most likely scenario was that Little attacked Rachel when she was close to her home and dragged her to his apartment. Criminologists found evidence supporting this theory. There were mud stains on the back of Rachel's legs, indicating she had been dragged along the ground. They also determined that the murder did not occur in the kitchen, but in the hallway, where most of the bloodstains were found and which the criminal tried to clean. Despite all this, forensic experts determined that Rachel had been sexually assaulted and Little's DNA was found on her body. This indicated that Rachel could have been dead by the time these events occurred. Based on all this evidence, murder charges were filed against Little on January 31st. However, he had hired a lawyer by then and retracted his initial statements, claiming he had not killed anyone. Eventually, the case went to trial in October, where Little's lawyers presented a new version of events. Little now claimed that his friend was the actual murderer. This was the same friend who was arrested with him on the day Rachel's body was discovered but was later released due to a lack of evidence linking him to the case. According to Little, he returned home early in the morning and found his friend and Rachel there. He claimed his friend had met Rachel and decided to go to his apartment because he had the keys. The three of them drank together, and then Rachel and Little went to the bedroom and had sexual relations. Shortly after, his friend burst into the room, angry, feeling sympathy for the girl, and enraged upon discovering their relationship. He grabbed a knife and stabbed Rachel multiple times, then threatened Little. Little demanded that his friend help him clean up the blood and never speak of what happened. Otherwise, he threatened to kill not only Little, but also his loved ones. As one might expect, no one believed this story. It contradicted the evidence and common sense. All indications pointed to Little as the real murderer, with no evidence implicating his friend. The trial concluded fairly quickly since the defense could not present any evidence to refute their client's guilt. As a result, Little was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. If his parole application is approved, he could be released at the age of 58. Rachel's murder was a devastating blow to all her family members, but her older sister, who suffered from diabetes, was particularly affected. The stress of the situation severely impacted her health. After a long struggle, she passed away in 2010, and her family blames Little for her death as well. Thus, the actions of this criminal led to 2 tragic losses.
Can you tell me what a lie is?
It's not the truth.
Can you tell me what the truth is?
It's not a lie.
If I told you your mother was in the courtroom here today, would that be the truth?
No, sir.
That would not be the truth. Why is that? Because she's not in the courtroom?
No, sir.
Okay. Where is your mother?
Jail.
AJ?
Yes, sir.
When is the last time that you saw your mother? Do you remember?
No, sir.
Has it been a long time?
Yes, sir.
That woman sitting right there between them, have you ever seen her before?
Yes, sir.
Who is that?
My mother.
Now you recognize your mother?
Yes, sir.
AJ? AJ,
Yes, sir.
give me your hand. All right.
Details about the early life of Amanda Lewis are scarce, but it is known that she was born in the early 1980s. Her mother, Brenda, raised her in Alabama, USA. At some point, Brenda married a man named Charles Burns, who became Amanda's stepfather and was actively involved in her upbringing. Amanda described herself as a restless, talkative, and sometimes problematic child who often struggled to follow rules. These traits might have contributed to her becoming a mother at the young age of 15. Unfortunately, her early motherhood ended in tragedy when her baby, Alex, died at 16 months old from a seizure disorder. Amanda recounted that on the day Alex passed away, she had left him sleeping while she took a bath. When she returned, she found him not breathing and rushed him to the emergency room, but it was too late. Later, while still in Alabama, Amanda entered what seemed to be a stable relationship, resulting in the birth of 2 children. Adriana Elaine Hutto and Andrew Jordan Hutto. Adriana was born on September 16, 1999, and his younger brother, Andrew, affectionately known as AJ, followed about a year later. Despite sharing the same last name, many sources indicate that the kids were half-brothers with different fathers. After the relationship ended, Amanda relocated with her children to a small community called Esto in Florida. Esto, a town of approximately 360 residents, had historically relied on the timber industry and more recently, agriculture and manufacturing. It also attracted tourists seeking natural beauty and tranquility. Amanda quickly adapted to her new environment, appreciating the peace and basic amenities it offered. She trained as a nursing assistant and secured a job at a nearby care and rehabilitation center, which provided her with stability. Despite the semblance of a stable life with a steady job, a simple home, and her 2 children, Amanda faced significant challenges. Her eldest daughter, Adriana, who was 7 at the time, was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. ADHD is a common neurodevelopmental disorder in children, characterized by difficulties in maintaining attention, impulsivity, and high levels of activity. Amanda found it challenging to form a close and calm relationship with Adriana, who required medication to manage her symptoms. The difficulties with Adriana contrasted with her relationship with AJ, which seemed to be less strained. She got along well with him as he was a calm child who could spend hours playing with his toy tractors. The contrast between the siblings' personalities was striking. Adriana required more attention both at home and at school, where the teachers were aware of her condition. However, this did not prevent Amanda from being called in on several occasions because her daughter had gotten into fights with other classmates, used foul language, or caused some sort of trouble. Additionally, Adriana occasionally wet her pants. Despite these setbacks, her teacher noted that her behavior was improving, and she was a smart girl who loved to read. At home, Adriana displayed the same behaviors, leading Amanda to frequently resort to time out as a form of punishment. This practice involves removing the misbehaving child from the area where the incident occurred, placing them in a separate spot, and leaving them alone to calm down and, if possible, reflect on their actions. However, as Amanda later admitted, not all moments were reflective. On some occasions, she used physical punishment to curb her daughter's misbehavior. At some point, Amanda met a new partner, a young man named Alan Carnley, who also came from Alabama. He had just come out of a failed relationship, from which he had 2 children. It appears that Alan's breakup was amicable, as there were no custody issues, and his children frequently visited and spent time with him and his new family. The events that unfolded in the summer of 2007 would change their lives forever. The family lived in a refurbished trailer on a spacious plot of land. That summer was particularly hot in Florida, so Alan decided to buy a pool to help beat the heat. The pool provided an opportunity for family fun, as his kids were also visiting at the time. The pool excited everyone, and the couple set strict rules for Amanda's younger children, prohibiting them from using it without an adult present. Amanda even removed the ladder to prevent the kids from accessing the pool unsupervised, storing it in the shed to eliminate any temptation. On Wednesday, August 8, 2007, early in the morning, Amanda returned home exhausted after a night shift at work. Eager to catch up on lost sleep, she decided to take a nap before starting the day's family activities, which included shopping for school supplies. That morning, the kids woke up and, according to Amanda, didn't want breakfast. After saying goodbye to her partner as he left for work, she left the kids watching cartoons on TV. One of Alan's sons, who was also in the house, was woken up by his father but was too sleepy to stay awake. He barely heard Adriana and AJ arguing before dozing off again. He heard them yelling, but it was nothing out of the ordinary, so he went back to sleep. According to Amanda's later account, she woke up sometime before noon and began tidying up the house before heading out with her children to shop for school supplies. Since they would have to wait a bit, she suggested that the kids go outside to play while she finished her chores. At one point, AJ came into the house to tell her that Adriana was in the pool. Initially, this didn't alarm her. She assumed her daughter was just playing near the pool. She instructed AJ to call Adriana and have both kids come back inside. Amanda then went back into the house, picked up her cell phone, and called her partner. She was talking to Alan while walking towards the window overlooking the pool. Everything changed when she saw AJ standing on a ladder at the edge of the pool, splashing his hands in the water. Amanda immediately ran outside, pulled her son away from the pool's edge, and was horrified to see Adriana floating face down in the water, her skin blue and lifeless. She described how she stretched her arms from the poolside, grabbed her daughter's feet, and pulled her out of the water. Once she had Adriana in her arms, she laid her on the grass, face up. The phone call with Alan was still active, and she screamed to him what had happened. Alan instructed her to call 911. As emergency personnel arrived, Amanda began performing CPR on Adriana, relying on her training as a nurse, although she admitted she had never had to use those skills in a real-life situation until then. The first responders on the scene were firefighters, with Unit Chief Charles taking over the resuscitation efforts as they awaited the arrival of medical and police teams. Their efforts seemed to yield some results. Adriana showed faint signs of life. Given the severity of Adriana's condition and the lack of advanced medical facilities in the small town of Esto, she was airlifted, accompanied by her mother, to the nearest hospital. Amid all the commotion, Alan's son woke up and, looking out the window, saw the frantic efforts to revive his stepsister. Before leaving, Amanda shouted to him to take care of his half-brother AJ and bring him inside. Later, the police contacted Amanda's children's grandparents to come and pick up AJ. Upon arriving at the hospital, the emergency doctor immediately took over Adriana's care, with a team working intensively to stabilize her and restore her vital signs. For a moment, it seemed they had succeeded. Adriana had a pulse. Tragically, after nearly an hour of effort, they lost the battle. Adriana, 7 years old, was pronounced dead at 5:05 that afternoon. Amanda later recounted that when she was told her daughter had passed, she felt her stomach churn. She was allowed to see Adriana one last time, kissing and hugging her, knowing it would be their final goodbye. In the eyes of the doctors, emergency staff, and police, it was a tragic accident, much like many others involving young children and bodies of water such as pools. While it was a tragic event, it could have easily marked the end of the story. However, miles away from the hospital where Adriana was declared deceased, her younger brother, AJ, left everyone stunned with a shocking account. Upon arriving at his grandparents' house, as they tried to calm him down, the little boy suddenly said that his mother had drowned Adriana. Naturally, upon hearing such a statement, Brenda and Charles, Amanda's mother and stepfather, were completely shocked and bewildered. The couple talked with the boy for a while, thinking he might have misunderstood something, but after asking him some questions and finding his answers convincing, they decided to take AJ to the police station to speak with the officers. With the grandparents' permission, AJ was questioned by the police, during which he stated that his mother had held his sister underwater as a punishment. According to the boy's account that morning, Adriana had taken a bottle of window cleaner and sprayed it all over the living room, the curtains, and the TV. AJ continued, saying that when his mother discovered what had happened, she became very angry, dragged her 7-year-old daughter to the pool, put her in it, and held her head under the water until she stopped moving. This story was repeated multiple times during 2 interviews with investigators and a third with a child expert. Although several aspects of the boy's story varied across the different interviews, the claim that his mother had submerged his sister's head underwater remained consistent. As a result, the authorities launched an investigation, starting with a thorough inspection of the house where the incident occurred. During this search, several things became evident. The bedroom shared by AJ and his sister was in disarray, with a broken bunk bed, complete disorganization, and a strong smell of urine. The word neglect echoed in the investigators' minds. Aside from the neglect, what shocked the detectives the most was the lack of toys in a room shared by 2 children. Naturally, Amanda was summoned to the police station to provide a statement and respond to her son's accusations. She appeared astonished and vehemently denied that her son's account had any truth to it. When confronted with the results of the house inspection, she explained that there were few toys in the children's room because she had thrown out the broken ones and donated the rest as a punishment for Adriana's bad behavior. As for the overwhelming smell of urine, she had no choice but to acknowledge it, explaining that Adriana often wet the bed. The investigators requested that Amanda undergo a polygraph test. She agreed immediately and successfully passed the test. However, her situation was further complicated by the autopsy results on her daughter's body. The post-mortem examinations confirmed that the cause of death was drowning, but they also revealed clear signs of assault on the girl's face. There were visible bruises that covered nearly the entire face and closely matched the size of an adult hand. With this evidence, on September 5, 2007, Amanda was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, facing the possibility of a life sentence or even the death penalty. The proceedings to prepare the case for trial began immediately. Although the authorities offered Amanda a plea deal, which would have required her to plead guilty to manslaughter in exchange for a 10-year sentence, she refused and chose to face trial for the charge against her. In the months leading up to the trial, investigators scrutinized all of AJ's statements to ensure that the young boy was not fabricating or confusing events. During interviews, they asked him questions such as what he was watching on TV that day and what other events occurred. He mentioned cartoons airing at that time, a helicopter flying overhead, and tree-cutting activities near his house to protect power lines. All these events were verified, showing that AJ remembered the day perfectly. Investigators also conducted interviews with family members, neighbors, co-workers, educators, and first responders who arrived at Amanda's house following the 911 call. The goal was to understand the family dynamics and ascertain the truth of what had happened. One of the interviewees was the doctor who had informed Amanda of Adriana's death. The doctor noted that Amanda's reaction to the tragic news was peculiar, as she showed no signs of grief. Instead, she asked where the vending machine was. With all the evidence gathered, the case went to trial on February 9, 2008. Over the next 4 days, Amanda's fate would be decided. Witnesses for both the prosecution and the defense took the stand. Authorities who responded to Amanda's emergency call in August 2007 described the dramatic scene they encountered, seeing Adriana clinging to life before she ultimately passed away. Testimonies were also heard from Alan and his children, who spoke about the family dynamics and details of the day in question. Amanda's boyfriend recounted what he heard while on the phone with Amanda during the incident. Alan's son had little to contribute as he had been asleep all morning and only emerged after the commotion began. Alan's daughter wasn't present on the day of the incident, but she narrated an earlier event at her aunt Amanda's pool. She described Amanda trying to teach Adriana to swim despite the child's terror, at one point threatening to let her go. She also stated that she often supervised the children while Amanda slept, witnessing Adriana being punished by being confined to a room for an entire day. Testimonies from Amanda's co-workers were particularly damning. They recounted an instance when Amanda, furious, brought Adriana to the nursing home, repeatedly saying she would gladly take her life. These harsh words spoken in front of the child were seen as inappropriate and cruel by her colleagues. On that particular morning, Adriana had taken a marker from Amanda's car and scribbled all over the interior, even writing "loser" in one spot. The trial highlighted how Adriana's ADHD had prevented Amanda from forming a positive relationship with her, but two testimonies stood out, those of Amanda and her son, AJ. As we saw at the beginning, AJ, after 6 months of not seeing his mother, took a while to recognize her and cried when he did. During her testimony on the stand, Amanda acknowledged that her daughter's behavioral problems had made their relationship difficult. She described Adriana as extroverted and hyperactive, noting that she was very much like herself, stubborn and always by her side. Amanda claimed that Adriana sometimes displayed violent behavior, recalling an incident where the girl threatened her younger brother with a sharp kitchen tool. Amanda also admitted that she had once placed Adriana in a specialized institution for 6 days. She confessed to the court that she might not have loved her daughter as much as she should have. Amanda stated that she often punished Adriana by confining her to her room, the same smelly and dirty room that shocked the investigators. She also took away most of the toys as a punishment for leaving them scattered around. Amanda admitted that she occasionally lost her temper and would slap or spank Adriana, such as during the incident when Adriana had written on the car with a marker. Amanda described how Adriana had just begun learning to swim, could move her arms and legs a bit, but was terrified of putting her head underwater. Amanda insisted that she was not teaching Adriana to submerge her head. When asked if she knew how to swim, Amanda replied that she did. Sticking to her version of events, Amanda admitted that when AJ told her Adriana was in the pool, she didn't immediately check on her. Instead, she called her partner and only looked out the window later. She saw AJ at the pool's edge trying to reach Adriana, who was splashing in the water. That was when, according to her, she rushed to help but was already too late. Amanda's defense argued that Adriana's death was a tragic accident. They claimed that the girl had pushed her brother's toy cart to the pool's edge, climbed on it, and used a tray to scoop out insects from the water. When she leaned over, the edge of the inflatable pool gave way and Adriana fell in. During the trial, the prosecution questioned Amanda about how she had pulled Adriana out of the pool. Amanda admitted that she hadn't given her daughter breakfast or her medication that morning, claiming that Adriana had said she didn't feel well. It later emerged that neither child had eaten breakfast or lunch by the time of the incident around midday. Another critical piece of testimony came from the autopsy report on Adriana. The original forensic specialist did not testify as he had been dismissed for negligence in over 30 autopsies. Instead, the director of investigations at the medical examiner's office explained the autopsy process and findings, emphasizing the bruises on Adriana's face. Amanda's defense strongly challenged this testimony, questioning whether the marks were definitively from a hand. The expert had to admit that she couldn't be absolutely certain. Then came the pivotal moment in the trial, AJ's testimony. In a lengthy and exhausting interrogation for a 7-year-old, AJ recounted the events he had described many times before to investigators. This time, he included a drawing he had made during psychological support sessions, illustrating what had happened. After his long testimony, AJ faced cross-examination from Amanda's defense, who pressed him until he became visibly confused and tired, giving contradictory answers. Despite this, The prosecution deemed him a credible witness, supported by other significant details, such as the fact that Adriana was tall enough to stand in the pool and easily lift her head above the water. With these elements, the trial proceeded, culminating in a dramatic and crucial phase where the truth about Adriana's death hung in the balance. In the end, while the defense argued that Adriana's tragic death was a very unfortunate accident, the prosecution maintained that Amanda had maliciously punished her daughter. The prosecution argued that Amanda had reached her breaking point due to immense stress and exhaustion, having tried numerous ways to discipline her daughter, none of which seemed effective. In a moment of overwhelming frustration, Amanda snapped. After all testimonies concluded, the jury deliberated for only 2 hours, including lunch, before returning with a verdict. They found Amanda Lewis guilty of first-degree murder and aggravated child abuse. The following month, during the sentencing hearing, the judge issued a life sentence plus an additional 30 years for aggravated child abuse. Amanda has attempted several appeals, none of which have been successful. She remains incarcerated at Lowell Correctional Institution. Reports following the trial's conclusion indicated that AJ was cared for by his grandparents in the months after the incident. However, once the judicial process was complete, AJ was reportedly put up for adoption. Since then, his life has been kept private. By 2024, AJ would be 24 years old, and we can only hope that his life has been significantly better than how it began.
Did you know that? That's the reason you didn't tell him? Because you knew it was wrong.
I knew it was wrong, but at the same sense, there's only so much you can do. And I just feel like, I don't know, I didn't know what to do anymore.
You said earlier...
I love her to death, and I didn't want to watch her anymore being miserable, but I didn't want to let go of her at the same time. I went both ways.
Were you with her the night before the death?
Yeah.
Because you said earlier, about 6 minutes ago, that you knew she drank a bottle the night before.
Yeah. She drank, not a bottle, but she put it in her vodka. I did know that. I said that yesterday.
Lynn Hernen was born in June 1956 in Madison, the capital of Wisconsin, USA. She was the only daughter of Lorraine and Robert Hernen. Her arrival was a joyous and significant event for the newlyweds. Robert, a World War II veteran, had started his own plumbing business upon returning to the United States, while Lorraine was involved in real estate sales. Their stable financial situation allowed them to provide Lynn with abundant opportunities. Robert and Lorraine were known for their warmth, and their home was always filled with joy and the company of friends and loved ones. It was no surprise that Lynn, from a young age, exhibited an outgoing and friendly nature. Her parents owned a cabin outside the city, which quickly became her favorite place. Lynn eagerly counted down the days to spend her school vacations there. For her father, these visits were perfect for a getaway, while Lorraine loved the peaceful and beautiful surroundings filled with lakes and tranquility. As a fervent nature lover, it was there that Lynn developed a special affection for animals. It wasn't long before this fondness turned into a passion for rescuing and caring for abandoned animals, with a particular soft spot for cats, making it common for her to always have a new pet. During her high school years, Lynn's keen interest in maintaining her appearance became evident to everyone. After graduating in 1974, she chose not to pursue a conventional university education, but instead decided to become a hairdresser. Encouraged by her father, Lynn opened her own salon, and in a short time, thanks to her people skills, she built a good clientele. During this period, she formed a close friendship with Corrine Poza. Also from Madison, Corrine was married. The two soon discovered they shared an appreciation for the simple things in life. Corinne admired Lynn's ability to think carefully about her decisions and manage her finances prudently, leading to a life without unnecessary luxuries. In 1983, Lynn started a romantic relationship with Jim Kelleher. Although few details of his biography are known, it is clear that his friends saw him as a man with a free and adventurous spirit. These qualities quickly won Lynn over. With this in mind, the couple embarked on a lifestyle that involved constantly moving, always in search of natural settings that offered the tranquility they yearned for. However, after a few years together, their relationship deteriorated, leading them to separate. Despite this, their affection for each other kept them close friends. During this time, Lynn met Jennifer Flower, a native of Franklin, Wisconsin, who was a single mother to a 9-year-old girl named Jessie Kerchevsky. Lynn's kind-hearted nature led her to support both mother and daughter, taking a special interest in helping raise young Jessie, to whom she grew very fond. In 1998, Corinne gave birth to her only son, Anthony Pozzo. From then on, he became a cherished member of Lynn's extended family. As he grew, Anthony enjoyed spending time with the Hernens, whether it was playing with Robert, who often shared stories about World War II, or watching classic movies with Lynn. In the summer of 2002, when Jessie graduated from high school, Lynn was bursting with pride. She would often show photos of the two of them at the graduation ceremony to visiting friends. 5 years later, when Robert passed away, the loss was so profound for Lynn that she struggled with depression. However, thanks to her unyielding spirit and optimism, she eventually overcame this tough period. Meanwhile, her beloved Jessie was having a hard time adjusting to adulthood. Deciding not to pursue a college education, she frequently changed jobs. But these were not the only troubling signs. In February 2010, seeking quick money, Jessie opened a bank account under the names of a neighbor couple and took out loans totaling $4,000. 2 months later, she committed even more serious acts of fraud, this time targeting her own mother. Without Jennifer's knowledge, Jessie took her social security card, IDs, checks, and car title and secured a loan of over $6,000. She also obtained a car title loan. When an arrest warrant was issued for Jessie, she attempted to flee and used fraudulent checks to pay for a hotel. However, the authorities caught up with her and she was arrested. Eventually, Jessie was sentenced to 2 years in prison before becoming eligible for parole. In 2013, the death of Lorraine was another significant blow for Lynn. During this painful time, the unwavering support of her friend Corinne, along with visits from Jennifer and Jessie, who was now back on the outside after serving her sentence, were crucial in helping her heal. Lynn continued to live as she always had, focusing on saving money and enjoying the company of her beloved cats. Additionally, Lynn avoided using technology and did not own a cell phone or computer. She preferred handling her transactions with cash or checks, a method Anthony found outdated but also charming. Although she had a credit card, she used it sparingly and always tried to pay off any debt quickly. Meanwhile, Jessie had found a new job and started dating a man named Scott, who was single but had a daughter from a previous relationship. They soon decided to move in together and discovered a shared passion for casinos, visiting them twice a week. Jessie often spent all her money at these establishments. In early 2016, Lynn began experiencing various health problems, including back issues and heart and liver complications, which required constant medical attention. As a result, she spent most of her time at home. Initially, Jennifer took on the role of her caregiver, but eventually, it was her younger and more energetic daughter, Jessie, who assumed the responsibility. This gave Jessie access to Lynn's credit cards. Additionally, Lynn signed blank checks for her to assist with groceries and medications. In August 2016, when Anthony started university, he made it a habit to stop by Lynn's house on his way to campus. During their shared lunches, Lynn expressed her desire to support him financially with his studies. However, Anthony was adamant about not wanting their relationship to be seen as a ploy for financial gain. Despite this, Lynn always found a way to give him some money for his expenses. In contrast, during her frequent visits, Jessie began excessively using Lynn's credit cards, taking cash advances, making online purchases, and spending more than Lynn could afford. She squandered money in casinos and city bars, knowing Lynn did not closely monitor her finances. As Jessie's spending increased, her job performance declined and she was eventually fired. However, she kept this a secret, so neither her boyfriend nor her friends knew about it. She even lied to Scott, claiming that Lynn was in intensive care due to a coma, giving herself more time to do as she pleased without being at home. Aware of her declining health and the possibility of needing to move to a nursing home, Lynn was worried about the well-being of her cats. She entrusted Jessie with their care and gave her power of attorney to manage her belongings if necessary. She also drafted her will, naming Jessie and Anthony as the main beneficiaries. She informed both of them, albeit separately, about this decision. From that moment on, Jessie focused on finding the best way to permanently remove her benefactor from the picture. The devious plan didn't take long to form in Jessie's mind. As she was responsible for administering Lynn's medications, she discovered that among them were eye drops containing tetrahydrozoline. After researching online, she learned that ingesting large amounts of this substance could be fatal. One night, after returning home visibly drunk from a bar outing with friends, Jessie told her boyfriend, Scott, that someone might have spiked her drink with eye drops, causing her drowsiness. It was late, and Scott, also tired, dismissed her strange claim. In the last week of September 2018, Lynn was hospitalized, and the medical staff recommended transferring her to a long-term rehabilitation unit. Lynn adamantly refused the suggestion, feeling ashamed of her physical condition. She forbade Jessie from mentioning her hospitalization to anyone, determined to avoid being seen in such a deplorable state, so unlike the woman she once was. That same week, remembering he had missed her birthday, Jim tried to reach out to her. However, Jessie answered Lynn's home phone and told him that Lynn was hospitalized and didn't want visitors. After being discharged from the hospital with a recommendation for home medical care, a first visit was scheduled for October 1st, 2018. However, Lynn postponed it to October 5th, choosing to remain isolated from everyone. By this time, Jessie had already spent around $144,000 from Lynn's accounts, but she wanted it all. On October 3rd, 2018, taking advantage of Lynn's negligence towards her health, Jessie visited her under the pretext of administering her medications. While preparing the usual pills, she secretly poured the contents of 6 bottles of eye drops into a glass of water and offered it to Lynn. The poison took effect, and Lynn gradually lost consciousness and died. Jessie meticulously staged the scene, spreading some crushed pills on a table near Lynn's body to give the impression of an overdose. She then called 911, reporting that she had found her friend unconscious and not breathing. When the responders arrived, they found Lynn lifeless in a reclining chair in the living room. In her statement to Officer Kelsey, Jessie explained her relationship with Lynn and her role as her caregiver, suggesting that Lynn, possibly overwhelmed by her health issues, had decided to take her own life. After transporting the body to the morgue, the police drafted a preliminary report, considering the case as a possible suicide. However, during interviews with her close circle, Jim expressed shock at such a possibility. He stated that the woman he had known for many years would never make such a decision, as it simply wasn't in her nature. Anthony shared a similar view, telling investigators that despite Lynn's fragile health, he had always seen in her a strong optimism. When Anthony and Jesse met for the first time since the tragedy, Anthony couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between his own grief and Jesse's cold detachment and interest in the inheritance she was about to receive. Around this time, Jesse opened an account at a department store in Lynn's name to obtain a credit card. Shortly after, barely a week after Lynn's death, she announced a garage sale on her social media, selling Lynn's personal belongings, including her furniture. By the end of 2018, when Jesse appeared with expensive Christmas gifts, Scott became seriously alarmed. Just weeks later, the county medical examiner's office, which conducted toxicology tests on Lynn's body, found high levels of tetrahydrozoline in her blood, exacerbated by her other medications. The experts concluded that her death was not the result of self-harm or an accident, as it was impossible to ingest such a dose through normal eye use. The head of the medical examiner's office submitted the toxicology report to the authorities, prompting the sheriff's office to reopen the investigation. Once Jesse learned that the investigation had been reopened, she was keen to know the results, but the police refused to disclose them to her. In the following months, the investigation increasingly pointed to Jesse as the main suspect. On July 9, 2019, Jesse was arrested and interviewed by the police. During the interview, she tried to convince the authorities of her frustration over not knowing the cause of Lynn's death. The most striking detail was her claim that Lynn was a habitual user of both legal and illegal substances, although she was careful to note that this never prevented Lynn from being functional. Jesse alleged that while she always made sure Lynn adhered to her treatments, Lynn would abuse alcohol or pills, and during those times, thoughts of self-harm would emerge. In a subsequent interview, when questioned about her financial incentive for caring for Lynn all that time, Jesse explained that although there was never an official agreement, Lynn often gave her checks or allowed her to use her credit card. She emphasized to the agents that Lynn was always generous with her resources, a quality that stood out even more as she was aware of her impending end. During the third interview, the detectives played their strongest card, informing Jesse about the lethal tetrahydrozoline poisoning. Jesse immediately claimed that Lynn often used eye drops in large quantities, buying multiple bottles at once. The agents responded by pointing out that no such bottles were found at Lynn's residence and that the substance levels in her system were inconsistent with ocular use. Faced with the evidence, Jesse's explanations became increasingly contradictory. Although she initially found the idea of voluntary ingestion hard to believe, she then suggested that Lynn might have researched ways to end her life and settled on poisoning. Regarding the crushed pills found on Lynn's body, Jesse said that Lynn had difficulty swallowing. However, the detectives, suspecting it was a staged scene, made their thoughts clear to Jesse. In response, Jesse vehemently denied any involvement in Lynn's death, even suggesting that the toxicologist had made an error, claiming she had never heard of the lethal effect of simple eye drops. The authorities then decided to question Scott. When they mentioned that Lynn had been administered high doses of the eye drop component, Scott recalled Jesse's strange comment about someone possibly spiking her drink with eye drops, causing her drowsiness. This led to another interrogation where Jesse again denied knowing about the substance's action. However, this time she changed her initial story, alleging that Lynn had confessed to her about unsuccessfully trying to take her own life with pills. According to Jesse, Lynn began mixing the eye drops with vodka over several days, though it only caused her stomach discomfort. Jesse also claimed to have seen Lynn drinking this mixture the day before her death. She then recounted that on the morning of October 3, 2018, Lynn asked for a bottle of water that she had previously filled with the contents of 6 eye drop bottles and vodka. They argued because Jesse refused to give it to her, but eventually, thinking it wouldn't be lethal given Lynn's habitual consumption of the mixture, she relented. When confronted by investigators about why she hadn't mentioned this before and why she didn't alert anyone to prevent the fatal outcome, Jesse simply stated that if Lynn didn't want to live anymore, she had every right to act accordingly. Despite her efforts to evade responsibility and avoid charges, the review of the credit card statements revealed unusual spending patterns for someone like Lynn, who rarely left the house. There were transactions in bars and casinos, places Lynn never frequented. At this stage, Anthony's cooperation with the authorities proved invaluable as he highlighted Lynn's financial habits, which starkly contrasted with these expenditures. Jesse's criminal history of fraud and her gambling addiction further exposed her malicious intent to the police, making her motives to harm Lynn crystal clear. Consequently, she was formally charged with first-degree intentional homicide and 2 counts of grand theft, though she pleaded not guilty. She was held without bail, with a bond set at $1 million. While in jail awaiting trial, Jesse formed a friendship with another inmate named Magdalena. Jesse confided in Magdalena that Lynn had died from an overdose of medications and even revealed that she had spent Lynn's money in casinos and on luxuries she otherwise couldn't afford. The process to bring Jesse to justice faced some delays, but finally commenced on October 24, 2023, after a 5-year wait. In his opening statement, the prosecutor painted an unflattering picture of the accused for the jury. In response, the defense, referring to Lynn as a mother figure to their client, countered by claiming that Lynn herself would have disagreed with the prosecution's narrative if she were present, dismissing it as an unfounded story. The attorney described Lynn as a woman with self-destructive tendencies, insisting on the theory of a consummated self-harm. However, the testimony of the medical examiner starkly contrasted with this narrative, asserting that the poisoning was undoubtedly caused by a third party. He emphasized Jesse's suspicious insistence on knowing the cause of Lynn's death. The prosecution revisited this point, suggesting that during her crime planning, Jesse hadn't anticipated a toxicology test for tetrahydrozoline on her victim. When Jim and Anthony took the stand, they both agreed that Lynn would never have allowed Jesse to squander her assets. Then, an unexpected testimony emerged, further cornering the accused and solidifying the case against her. The significant revelations came from Magdalena, Jesse's cellmate. After 2 days of deliberations, on Tuesday, November 14, 2023, the jury delivered its verdict. As the judge read the jury's decision, Jessie broke down in tears, aware that she faced the possibility of a mandatory life sentence. Outside the courthouse, the prosecutor expressed his condolences to Lynn's family, satisfied with the verdict. Anthony expressed immense gratitude to the detectives and prosecutors for their relentless pursuit of the truth. In his own words, thanks to them, he could confirm what he had always suspected, that something was not right with Jessie. The sentencing hearing took place on Friday, April 5, 2024. Accompanied by her new attorney, Jessie spoke for 2 hours about what she considered a flawed legal process, claiming she had not received effective defense. Nevertheless, after her testimony, the judge sentenced Jessie to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years for the crime against Lynn Hernen. Additionally, she must serve 5 consecutive years for the 2 counts of theft, making her ineligible for parole until she is 80 years old. Furthermore, she was ordered to pay $386,000 in restitution through an escrow account for any money earned from interviews, book deals, movies, or documentaries related to the case. Present in the courtroom during the victim impact statements, Anthony had a few words for Jessie, wishing that her time behind bars would allow her to reflect on her actions. He said that, as he had hoped, her facade had finally ended, and she could no longer deceive anyone. Although satisfied with the sentence, he expressed that it was impossible not to miss Lynn, who had been like an aunt to him. In honor of that love, Anthony plans to choose a monument where Lynn's remains can be laid to rest, seeking to provide her soul with the same tranquility and peace she always sought in life. Most people would be thrilled to accept a job with a good income and benefits without much hesitation. However, failing to thoroughly research the job or employer can result in being scammed, or worse, it could cost you your life. In the United States, there are many websites where individuals or organizations can post job listings for numerous ideal positions with attractive salaries. Many believe that landing such a job would lead to a better life. However, in today's case, the men who went to the address for the job offer never returned. What happened to them? Who hired them? And for what purpose? Richard Beasley was born on June 15, 1959, in Washington, D.C., United States. His mother, Carol, whose maiden name remains unknown, became pregnant at a young age. Although she later married Richard's biological father, their relationship was short-lived. Soon after, Carol met Jim Beasley. At the time, Carol worked as a secretary at a high school, while Jim was a truck driver. After a brief courtship, Jim and Carol married and later had 2 daughters. However, Jim was far from the ideal husband or father figure. He struggled with alcohol addiction, enjoyed gambling, was jealous and frequently abusive, creating a fearful atmosphere at home. Despite the hostile environment, Carol tried to instill faith and the value of charity in her children to give them hope. By his teenage years, Richard had developed a knack for smooth communication and persuasion. After graduating from high school in 1976, he spent some time in the Navy before attending trade school, where he learned machining skills. This trade allowed him to earn a living. Richard was also a motorcycle enthusiast, a passion that connected him with a girl named Tina Kern, who shared his love for the speed and culture of motorcycles. During this period, Richard began engaging in criminal activities. In 1985, after stealing a motorcycle in Texas, he was imprisoned, which temporarily ended his romance with Tina. However, after serving only 4 years, he was granted parole in 1989. At 30 years old, Richard returned to Akron and reconnected with Tina. They married, moved in together, and in 1993, they welcomed their first and only daughter, Tanya Beasley. During Tanya's early years, Richard appeared to be a hard-working man and a loving father. Tanya enjoyed outings with her father to the mall, park, or zoo, and painting together was another activity she cherished. Tina, having become a caring woman and devoted mother, longed to leave behind their past, including the motorcycle lifestyle and its associated culture. Richard did not share this desire but kept it to himself. Despite repeatedly assuring his wife that he now led a more upright and responsible life, the truth was different. Richard soon returned to a life of crime, involving drug trafficking, home invasions, and selling firearms to criminals, all while keeping his activities hidden from Tina. In the mid-90s, Richard Beasley was apprehended by agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. He was sentenced by an Ohio judge to 7 years in federal prison on charges of robbery and illegal arms trafficking. Due to an administrative error, Richard avoided extradition to Texas, where he was still on parole. As a result, Tina divorced him, and their daughter Tanya remained in her mother's custody. During his imprisonment, Richard found solace in his faith, claiming that God had always been the one constant in his life. Upon his release in 2003, he returned to Akron with a new sense of purpose. Determined to turn over a new leaf, he soon secured a job as a garbage truck driver. Additionally, he became a volunteer chaplain at a local church, dedicating himself to spreading the divine word and aiding the homeless. He particularly empathized with those who had made mistakes or were suffering from substance abuse. Richard became a frequent volunteer at a soup kitchen, where he formed a close bond with a boy named Brogan Rafferty. Born on December 24, 1994, Brogan was the eldest son of Yvette and Michael Rafferty, who had started their relationship at a young age. The family, later completed with the arrival of a daughter, lived in a modest home in Akron suburbs, marked by a certain dysfunctionality. Yvette's long-standing substance abuse issues worsened over time, while Michael did his best to support the family with his early morning machinist job. The situation was challenging, as Yvette gradually neglected her responsibilities, leaving Brogan largely to fend for himself. Brogan also couldn't rely on his father, as Michael often resorted to physical punishment when Brogan got into trouble or displeased him. Unsurprisingly, by the age of 8, Brogan sought refuge in Richard's presence. Once, when Yvette disappeared due to her substance abuse, Brogan, feeling helpless, turned to Richard for support. From that moment, Richard took on a protective and mentoring role for the boy. Initially, Tanya felt jealous of their bond, but she eventually understood that Brogan needed a positive figure in his life. In 2005, Richard was involved in a car accident while working, resulting in significant fractures as well as head, neck, and spinal injuries. To manage his pain, he was prescribed painkillers, to which he eventually became addicted, though he kept this a secret. This addiction drastically changed Richard, making him prone to outbursts of anger over trivial matters. Despite this, his reputation as a community pillar remained intact. In 2009, using a financial settlement from his accident, Richard opened a halfway house for parolees and sex workers. Judges, lawyers, and even prosecutors believed he was genuinely committed to being a reformed man. Richard was known for his advocacy not only for the accused and addicts, but also for his ability to persuade judges to grant their release, after which they would come under his supervision at the halfway house. There was undeniably something likable about Richard, and he possessed a remarkable talent for convincing others. During her first year of high school, Tanya wanted to follow in her father's footsteps and got involved in his charitable organization, a decision that Richard wholeheartedly supported. Together, they managed to raise significant funds for their cause. Around this time, Tanya had her first boyfriend, a boy with a troubled past who remained anonymous. He claimed to have changed, and when Richard asked Tanya if her boyfriend would be willing to work at the halfway house, she thought it could be a positive influence. However, Richard actually intended to have him sell drugs in the neighborhood. While helping Richard clean out his voicemail, Tanya stumbled upon a message from her boyfriend, revealing their secret activities. Feeling devastated and betrayed, Tanya found even the simple act of walking through the school halls and talking to friends challenging. She grew distrustful and doubted everyone's true intentions. Her relationship with Richard suffered a severe blow, and it was painful for her to distance herself from the father she once adored. Richard then grew closer to Brogan, who would do anything for him. Brogan viewed Richard as the only person who had been there for him during his troubled childhood. The kind and gentle boy Brogan once was had transformed into a dominant and assertive young man. Meanwhile, the halfway house had clearly become a front for illegal activities. Richard exploited the women he housed, keeping them in a cycle of drug addiction and forcing them into prostitution, all under constant threats. Eventually, the women had enough and reported him to the authorities. In December 2010, after a police raid on the house, they found chemicals used to manufacture drugs, prescription medications, and other substances. Richard was arrested and charged with drug trafficking and inducing prostitution. Additionally, he had violated his parole again and faced the possibility of decades in prison. In July 2011, Richard managed to post bail. With his trial scheduled for September, he was supposed to return to court in August. Desperate to avoid more prison time, he concocted a plan with Brogan to assume another person's identity, which required killing someone. They scoured the streets of Akron and eventually encountered Ralph Geiger, a disheveled 59-year-old man who was unemployed and living in a shelter, trying desperately to get back on his feet. Ralph Geiger's situation was particularly tough, as he had seen better days and always adhered to the rules. After graduating from high school in the 1970s, he moved to California and worked in an antique store with his father. When he returned to Ohio in the late 1990s, he started his own remodeling and handyman business. Ralph found considerable success, even employing others. However, by the early 2000s, the economic recession and housing market collapse left him homeless. Though Ralph had no wife or children, he did have a genuine friendship with Summer Raleigh, a 26-year-old woman who saw him as a father figure. Determined to improve his circumstances, Ralph frequently used the public library's computer to search for jobs. This was where Richard approached him with an enticing job offer, taking care of a cattle ranch and handling general maintenance. The job came with a 2-bedroom mobile home, rent-free, and a salary. Seeing this as an incredible opportunity, Ralph immediately accepted. He shared the good news with Summer, but curiously did not provide details about how he found this dream job. On August 8, 2011, Ralph called Summer to tell her he was on his way to his new job. She wished him luck and asked him to stay in touch. That same day, he got into Richard's car, with Brogan driving. About 90 minutes later, they stopped in a forest. Richard invited Ralph for a walk, and with Brogan by his side, he coldly murdered Ralph. They then took his documents. Brogan was tasked with the gruesome job of digging a grave to dispose of the body. On the way back, Richard threatened Brogan with a knife, warning him that if he spoke, his mother and sister would be in danger. The following week, Richard assumed Ralph's identity to secure housing and a job. When he missed his court date in August, a warrant for his arrest was issued. Richard, needing to go into hiding again, moved to another room in mid-October, this time with a man named Joe. He asked Joe to share his internet service. Richard did not completely abandon his previous hideout, thinking it would be useful to have 2 different places to take refuge. Recognizing the potential of the internet but aware of his limitations, he turned to Tanya for help. Under a fabricated story, Richard asked his daughter Tanya to create an account on a classifieds website, and she agreed. Richard then posted the same job offer that had lured Ralph, using the pseudonym Jack. The ad sought a specific profile, a single, older man, someone who might be down on his luck. In a declining economy with high unemployment rates, the responses came quickly. In mid-October, Richard responded to David Pauley, one of the applicants. David, around 50 years old and from Norfolk, Virginia, was unemployed and had divorced in 2009. He had a son, and these circumstances had left him a sad man. He spent hours aimlessly browsing the internet with little hope. His family details are sparse, but it's known he had a twin sister named Deborah. When David saw the ad, he thought it was too good to be true, but felt tempted nonetheless. Richard, while providing details about the job, also mentioned his role as a preacher. When David shared that he had many possessions to sell, Richard saw an even greater opportunity. They arranged to meet on October 23, 2011, in Marietta, Ohio. David excitedly shared the news with Deborah, feeling triumphant about securing what he considered a great job offer. He even remarked to his sister that it seemed like a divine blessing. On October 22, 2011, David prepared for his departure, calling Deborah and promising to stay in touch as much as possible given the rural setting. Meanwhile, Richard and Brogan drove to the forest where Ralph was buried, and Brogan dug a new grave. The next day, David met Richard and Brogan at a restaurant for breakfast. Afterward, they headed to the remote area where Richard claimed his property was located. Upon arriving at the site, Brogan excused himself to go to the bathroom, leaving Richard alone with David. Seizing a moment when David was distracted, Richard drew a gun and shot him. David fell to the ground, lifeless. Hearing the gunshots, Brogan ran back and found Richard rifling through David's pockets. Following Richard's orders, Brogan disposed of the body in the freshly dug grave. Acting as if nothing had happened, they returned to the restaurant in Marietta and took David's car, along with his belongings. These included tools and even Christmas decorations. They sold everything, making around $1,000. However, Richard's addiction was costly, and the money quickly vanished within just 15 days. Desperate, Richard sought a new victim from the applicants responding to his job ad. The next respondent was Scott Davis, a 49-year-old man from South Carolina. Scott was single and, despite having gardening skills, couldn't find a job. The job offer seemed attractive to him, as it would also allow him to visit his mother in Ohio. During their conversation, Richard learned that Scott owned a Harley-Davidson motorcycle and had various work tools. They arranged to meet on Sunday, November 6, 2011. On the appointed day, Richard and Brogan waited at a restaurant where security cameras captured their presence. Once Scott arrived, he had breakfast with them, and they followed their usual pattern. As they approached the remote wooded area, Richard repeated his usual story, saying they needed to stop to pick up some equipment to repair the road leading to the farm. Deep in the woods, Richard told Scott they were lost and it was time to turn back. Sensing something was off, Scott turned to look around and immediately felt uneasy. Just as he finished turning, he saw Richard pointing a gun at him. Overwhelmed with fear, Scott instinctively started running. Knowing he had to escape at all costs, he sprinted away without looking back. Richard fired, hitting Scott in the elbow. Scott fell to the ground, but before Richard could aim again, Scott got up and, with blood gushing from his injured arm, continued to run. Seeking refuge, he stumbled down a slippery slope. As he got back on his feet, another shot rang out, grazing his head, a chilling reminder of how close the danger was. Another bullet whizzed past him, dangerously close. Scott's heart raced faster than he had ever experienced before, but he ran, with no trace of doubt in his body. Emerging from the dense foliage, he stopped, disoriented but aware that danger was nearly inevitable. Meanwhile, Richard returned to the road, got into the car with Brogan, and they began searching for him. Richard even instructed the young boy to run over Scott if they spotted him on the road. Scott, however, had other plans. He decided to hide in a creek, thinking it was safer than seeking help immediately. He stayed there for 7 hours, constantly alert to any strange sounds. After that, he continued his escape until he found a house and knocked on the door. The residents were initially skeptical of Scott's story, but his bloody and desperate state convinced them to call emergency services. The response team was sent right away. When they heard Scott's story, they too were suspicious, initially thinking it might be a drug deal gone wrong. Moreover, there was no farm matching the description Scott had given. Fortunately, Scott could prove his story with the classified ad he had responded to and described his attackers. He said the older man, about 51 or 52 years old, had dark hair with some gray and went by the name Jack. The younger one, around 17 years old and was very tall. The police shared this information with the media, hoping someone might provide a lead. Within hours, Scott's story caught the attention of local news outlets. During the investigation, the police received an unexpected call from Deborah. She recognized the similarities between Scott's ordeal and what her brother David had told her before he left. Not hearing from him, something very unusual, gave her the feeling that her brother might be a victim. Focusing their search on the wooded area where Scott had hidden, authorities found a trail of blood and followed it to the attack site. There, they discovered a freshly dug, empty grave, concluding it was meant for Scott and suspecting it wasn't the only one. The police withdrew to get tracking dogs, and upon returning, they combed the area and found a second grave. Inside, they found David's lifeless body. Days later, during another search of the area for clues leading to the pair of criminals described by Scott, authorities discovered a third grave containing Ralph's remains. At that time, the man's identity was unknown. Lacking the necessary resources to continue the investigation, the local police contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. The FBI took the first steps by analyzing the classified ad and identifying two key points: the victims' profiles and the ad's writing style. They also began tracking the advertiser's IP address. Despite the widespread attention and warnings about the fake ads, Richard still needed money and continued searching for new victims. Astonishingly, despite the widespread warnings about the fraudulent ads, Timothy Kern fell into the trap. Timothy, 57, was a father of 3. Divorced in 1997, he maintained a close relationship with his family, often through social media, where they tagged each other in photos and videos, sharing a lot of information online. His family was well aware of his plans and activities. On November 10, 2011, Timothy posted on Facebook, announcing his decision to leave the past behind and start working on a farm near Cambridge, Ohio. He said goodbye to his ex-wife and children and packed his belongings. On the morning of November 13th, he sent a final message to one of his children. Aware that the police were on his trail, Richard altered his strategy, which effectively kept the authorities at bay. Thus, Timothy's meeting with the duo took place at an abandoned shopping center. Once there, Richard followed his usual routine. When his victim was distracted, he pulled the trigger. Brogan then dug a grave and buried Timothy on the spot. Meanwhile, the FBI's efforts to trace the ad's IP address led them to a house in Akron. The owner, named Joe, mentioned that he had rented a room to a man named Ralph, whom he described as friendly but always on his computer. This detail strongly suggested the suspect's profile. Joe provided the police with the man's phone number without any resistance. Another team of investigators retrieved surveillance footage from the restaurant where Scott had met Richard. They discovered that the man they were looking for was, in fact, Richard. To make matters worse, he was not alone but accompanied by a young man, Brogan. The combination of the surveillance images and the phone number provided by Joe, tracked through the GPS system, allowed them to locate the main suspect. Amazingly, he was just a few blocks away. As Richard walked down the street, agents surrounded him. Without any dramatic chases or extensive operations, he was apprehended. A subsequent search of the two residences he had used revealed additional information, including documents and photos. It was finally confirmed that the second body was Ralph's. Not long after, agents arrested Brogan at his home. Thanks to his statements, the police were able to locate Timothy's body. Richard faced 25 charges, including aggravated murder, robbery, kidnapping, and identity theft. Brogan was assigned a lawyer, and a plea deal was discussed on the condition that he cooperated with the investigation. However, he refused, considering it a betrayal of Richard, and resisted any deals offered to him. Thus, his trial began in October 2012. The Ohio jury, composed of 7 women and 5 men, deliberated for 20 hours. Brogan was acquitted of the identity theft charge but found guilty on all other counts. He was convicted of 3 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of attempted murder. The jury noted that his age made the decision difficult. On November 13, 2012, Brogan was sentenced to life without parole for 70 years. In Richard Beasley's case, once the facts were established regarding the murders of Ralph Geiger, David, and Timothy Kern, the jury found him guilty in March 2013 of 26 counts, including aggravated murder, kidnapping, and aggravated robbery. They unanimously recommended the death penalty. Consequently, in April 2013, during the sentencing hearing, Richard was condemned to death. However, a procedural error in the first trial led to a re-evaluation of the facts in 2020, reaffirming the sentence. Currently, while awaiting execution, Richard continues to proclaim his innocence. His daughter, Tanya Beasley, has shared on various programs that guilt plagued her for many years, feeling she might have inadvertently helped her father without knowing about his crimes. Despite this, she has strived to live her life as correctly as possible and even met with the son of one of the victims to express her solidarity. Jennifer Jackson was born on November 10, 1965 in Tennessee, USA. While details about her parents remain unknown, it is known that she had 2 sisters, Cindy and Grace, and a half-brother named Eric. Information about her life started becoming available around 1980, and she was consistently described as a kind-hearted person. At around the age of 15, Jennifer moved to Memphis to live with her aunt and uncle. Her family was involved with the Church of the Holy Communion in Memphis, where her uncle served as a reverend. Jennifer demonstrated a strong drive for achievement and dedication to her studies from an early age. Besides her academic pursuits, she had a passion for sports, especially challenging ones, which led her to become a triathlete and excel in competitions. Jennifer enrolled at Memphis State University and graduated in 1985 with a degree in business administration at just 20 years old. Those who knew her during this period noted that she was not only an excellent student, but also compassionate and generous. After completing her studies, she married Nazmi Hassania, a former army captain of Lebanese origin. On March 17, 1987, they welcomed their first and only child, Nora. However, the couple soon divorced, and Jennifer raised her daughter as a single mother. Jennifer did not let the end of her marriage discourage her. She remarried when Nora was in elementary school, but the relationship turned abusive and ended in 2001. Her brother Eric later revealed that the man had even brought a gun to the divorce negotiations. Jennifer then began dating Mark Irvin, a Methodist minister. However, this relationship was also unstable, with frequent breakups and reconciliations. Jennifer's friends did not like Mark, and Nora later described him as controlling and manipulative. Jennifer and Nora lived in a beautiful house in the Memphis suburbs. Jennifer worked as an investment banker at SunTrust Capital Markets, where she was very successful and earned a salary that allowed her to comfortably support her small family. During this time, Nazmi reappeared in their lives. Despite having been absent during Nora's early years, Nazmi attempted to mend their relationship when she reached her teenage years. Nazmi owned a convenience store and also ran a limousine business. Although everything seemed legitimate on the surface, a tragic event brought his activities under scrutiny by the authorities. On the night of January 26, 2004, an unidentified man entered Nazmi's store with the intent to rob it. Nazmi apparently resisted, and the robber shot him, causing his immediate death. When the police were notified, they arrived at the scene, initially believing it was a robbery gone wrong. However, certain elements led them to suspect that it was a planned attack by someone who knew Nazmi well. Upon reviewing the security camera footage, detectives saw the assailant not only stealing cash from the register, but also entering Nazmi's office, seemingly searching for something specific beyond just money. The convenience store was located across from a strip club, and its patrons frequently used Nazmi's limousine services. Rumors soon emerged that Nazmi rented his limousines for questionable activities and possessed compromising video evidence of clients. Given this information, authorities theorized that the attacker was looking for those videotapes and that Nazmi's murder had a deeper motive than simple robbery. It was also speculated that the incident might be connected to the Mexican drug cartel, Los Zetas. However, no concrete evidence emerged to identify the attacker, and the case eventually went cold. At the time of her father's death, Nora was 16 years old. The impact of his passing seemed minimal, as her mother had always been her primary support. Observers noted the close relationship between Jennifer and Nora. Jennifer was devoted to pleasing and indulging her daughter, and Nora confirmed they had an open line of communication, keeping no secrets from each other. However, Nora was a rebellious teenager, unlike her studious mother. By 2005, Nora was enrolled in the Gateway Homeschool program due to her struggles in formal education. She had previously attended various public and private schools, facing numerous issues. At 18, she was still in the 11th grade, typically for students aged 16. This was a constant concern for Jennifer, leading to frequent arguments about Nora's future. At one point, Nora expressed a desire to join the military instead of continuing her education. Nora often partied, used drugs and alcohol, and skipped classes. She wanted to be independent, and Jennifer was struggling to discipline her. As a single mother, Jennifer found it challenging to manage her daughter's behavior. By mid-2005, she decided to take serious action to address Nora's misconduct. She gave Nora an ultimatum. If she didn't start behaving and showing dedication to her studies, she would be sent to a boarding school. This, of course, led to more arguments and tension between the two. However, any quarrel between mother and daughter would pale in comparison to the tragedy that was about to strike the family. On June 4, 2005, Jennifer attended a wedding while Nora spent the afternoon getting a manicure in preparation for her evening plans. She first went to an Italian festival with her boyfriend and friends, then spent the night partying, as was her habit. Recently, she had argued with Jennifer, and after consuming alcohol and cannabis, Nora vented to her friends, complaining about her mother and using derogatory language to describe her. According to her friends, Nora left the party around midnight. After driving for a while and stopping at a gas station to buy cigarettes, she arrived home around 5 a.m. Jennifer should have been home from the wedding for several hours by then and likely sleeping peacefully. However, on her way to her room, Nora noticed her mother's bedroom door was open and the bathroom light was on, which was unusual. Upon entering the room, she discovered a horrifying scene. Jennifer was lying at the foot of the bed, completely naked and covered in blood. Initially, Nora tried to find a pulse and shook her mother repeatedly, trying to get a response. When there was no reaction, she ran to her neighbor for help, telling him someone had broken into their house and her mother was bleeding. The neighbor grabbed his gun and went back with Nora to the house. Once there, Nora called 911, telling the operator the same thing she had told her neighbor. Distressed and crying, she repeatedly asked for an ambulance to be sent. Unfortunately, there was no way to save Jennifer. Authorities arrived at the scene around 5:15 a.m. on June 5th. The first thing they noticed in the room, now a crime scene, was that Jennifer had been repeatedly attacked with a sharp weapon and her head was covered with a wicker basket. Despite being naked, there were no apparent signs of sexual assault, although this would need to be confirmed by the forensic examiner. The level of violence used in the fatal attack indicated a significant amount of rage towards the victim. Combined with the fact that her face had been covered, authorities suspected that the attacker knew Jennifer. The crime appeared to be deeply personal. Authorities estimated Jennifer's time of death to be between 1 and 3 a.m. The chief medical examiner of Shelby County determined that Jennifer had died from multiple stab and puncture wounds, 50 in total, distributed across her chest, abdomen, back, neck, and arms. He concluded that 2 different knives might have been used, or it could have been a single weapon with both a sharp and serrated edge. He also found defensive wounds on Jennifer's hands and a recent contusion on the left side of her head caused by a blunt object. Sexual assault was ruled out. During their search of the house, police noticed broken glass in the kitchen from a door leading to the garage. However, the glass appeared to have been broken from the inside, aligned with a lock visible only from inside the house. Additionally, the exterior doors to the garage were locked, suggesting the scene might have been staged. They canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing residents, but no one had seen an intruder that night. The first suspect was Mark, Jennifer's on and off boyfriend. The detectives discovered that Mark had called Jennifer the night of her murder. During questioning, Mark claimed he was asleep at his home in Jackson, Tennessee, 90 minutes away from Jennifer's house, at the time of the crime. Despite this alibi, his repeated follow-up calls to the police for updates on the case aroused suspicion. However, further interrogation confirmed he had no involvement in the events of June 5th. With Mark ruled out, police turned their attention to another possible suspect, Nora. In her interview with the detectives, Nora recounted her activities that night, saying she had driven around after leaving the party. What she didn't mention was that she had stopped at a nearby Walgreens to buy first aid supplies. The police discovered this after finding a bag with these items in Nora's car. She had purchased bandages, peroxide, and other items typically used to treat a cut. Previously, authorities had noticed Nora had a bandaged hand, which she explained as a cut from a broken beer bottle at the Italian festival. Security videos from Walgreens showed Nora purchasing the items around 4 in the morning, and she admitted they were for treating a cut she had sustained. However, authorities were skeptical of her story, as the video suggested the cut was fresh, not several hours old. Over the following days, Nora gave different answers each time she was asked about her whereabouts on the night of the crime and how she injured her hand. On June 8, 2005, Nora was admitted to a facility in the Memphis area known for treating mental health and substance abuse issues. While she was hospitalized, her mother's funeral took place. The funeral services and subsequent burial for Jennifer were held on Friday, June 10, 2005, at the Church of the Holy Communion. Nora was allowed to attend the funeral but returned to the health center afterward. Upon her release from the hospital, Nora was permitted to live on her own since she was of legal age. Her aunts reported tension between them and Nora regarding the money from Jennifer's life insurance. The specific issue was how much of the money would be allowed for Nora's apartment rent. Nora did not seem to be mourning her loss. In fact, once she settled into her apartment, she frequently hosted parties. Several friends later mentioned that her place was a popular spot for drinking, with no parental supervision. By the end of the summer of 2005, after just a month in the apartment, Nora was evicted for causing disturbances, violating the lease, and having an unauthorized pet. While Nora continued her fast-paced life, authorities pressed on with their investigation. They initially found her attire suspicious. Known for being particular about her appearance, she was wearing a worn gray long-sleeved shirt on the night of the murder. This was unusual given that summer was approaching, and it was quite warm in Memphis. Nora later claimed she simply dressed that way, even wearing long sleeves to the beach. But to the authorities, her clothing choice seemed like an attempt to conceal something. The police also examined her cell phone records and noticed a suspicious pattern. Nora was typically glued to her phone, but on the night of the murder, between 1 and 3 in the morning, there was no activity at all. This time frame matched the estimated time of Jennifer's death. After speaking with the victim's family and friends, authorities learned that Jennifer and Nora had been experiencing significant conflict and frequent arguments about Nora's behavior. They also heard that Nora had shown an interest in what she would inherit if something happened to her mother. This led the police to form a hypothesis about what happened on June 5th. According to their theory, Nora and Jennifer had another argument, and in a fit of rage, Nora attacked her mother. After committing the crime, Nora allegedly cleaned up the scene and tried to cover it up. The police speculated that Nora left the house after brutally attacking Jennifer, drove to a friend's house, and then returned hours later, pretending to discover the horrific scene. One of the details the police used to support this hypothesis was Nora's 911 call. At one point, the operator asked if her mother had been shot, and Nora responded that she hadn't. According to the detectives, it wasn't immediately apparent how the wounds were inflicted, so only the attacker would know for sure. However, the police's theory was based on conjecture, relying on the tense relationship between Nora and her mother and considering Nora's rebellious behavior. They found drops of Jennifer's blood on the front step of the house, leading them to think Nora had disposed of evidence far away. But they never found the murder weapon or the bloody clothes Nora would have worn if she had committed the crime. They also didn't find any of Nora's or Jennifer's blood in Nora's car. Upon examining all the evidence, they discovered some hair strands in Jennifer's hand. A preliminary examination suggested it could be Jennifer's own hair. A more detailed analysis to confirm the hair's origin was never conducted. Another crucial piece of evidence that contradicted the police's hypothesis was Nora's nails. The police said Jennifer had fought her attacker, but Nora's manicure was in perfect condition the next morning, as shown in photos taken at the police station. Additionally, she had no injuries or bruises on her body, except for the cut on the back of her hand, indicating there had been no physical altercation or struggle. Eventually, the authorities found DNA evidence at the crime scene that did not match either Nora or Jennifer. They could not identify the source of the sample, but they were certain it did not belong to any family member. Despite the lack of forensic evidence linking her to the crime, Nora was charged with first-degree murder and arrested on September 29, 2005. Many of Jennifer's friends and acquaintances supported Nora's innocence, describing her as a devoted and loving daughter, incapable of committing such a crime against her mother. According to a family friend, Nora would often cancel plans to be with her mother whenever Jennifer needed her. These supporters felt the police were overlooking an important fact. Less than a year and a half earlier, Nora's father had been attacked, and after his death, Jennifer inherited his entire estate. This led some to believe that Jennifer might have unknowingly become the next target of the same people who had killed her ex-husband. However, the authorities dismissed this hypothesis, claiming they had investigated any possible connection between the two fatal attacks. Another aspect the investigators did not consider was Jennifer's numerous volatile relationships with various men. Although they were aware of her tumultuous romance with the religious minister Mark, they overlooked the fact that in the months leading up to her death, Jennifer frequently dated and spent nights with strangers. On October 5th of that year, Nora pleaded not guilty to the charge of murdering her mother. She was given a bail amount of $500,000, which she could not afford, leading to her being held at the Federal Correctional Facility in Memphis for the next 3 years awaiting trial. Finally, on February 9, 2009, Nora Jackson's trial began. As the state presented its case, Nora sat alone in the courtroom without any family members by her side. The defense attorney took on her case pro bono. She argued that the authorities had no concrete evidence incriminating Nora beyond a reasonable doubt for the heinous crime against her mother. Valerie pointed out that Jennifer had been attacked more than 50 times, and it was hard to believe that her teenage daughter could have desired her death, let alone committed such a brutal act. Nora did not testify during her trial, and the defense did not call any witnesses. However, her attorney cross-examined several prosecution witnesses to demonstrate that the case against her client was weak and unfounded. The prosecution's DNA expert testified that neither Nora's blood nor DNA was found at the crime scene. He also confirmed that the authorities had not conducted tests on the hair found in Jennifer's hands. The defense attorney insisted that forensic evidence did not lie, and nothing at the crime scene implicated Nora. She also criticized the crime scene investigator, suggesting he had overlooked evidence pointing to another person. She highlighted a cat that appeared in some photos, implying there were other overlooked details in the investigation. Nora's pet cat had roamed freely around the crime scene during the investigation, potentially compromising the integrity of the collected evidence. The prosecution called several of the accused and victims' family members and friends to testify. A friend of Nora testified that around 1 a.m. on June 5, 2005, she received a call from the Jackson house phone, followed seconds later by a call from Nora's cell phone. Another friend testified that the night before Jennifer's murder, Nora had spoken ill of her mother, saying she should go to hell. A third friend told the jury that Nora called him between 4 and 5 a.m. on the night of the crime, asking him to meet her at her house. He was the only witness to definitively place Nora at the crime scene before the discovery of the body and the 911 call. The prosecution asked all of Nora's friends if they had noticed any cuts or bandages on her hands during the parties she attended before returning home, and they all said no. However, one friend mentioned during cross-examination that Nora had asked for a Band-Aid at the party on Saturday night. The neighbor Nora sought help from also testified. He recounted the events of that morning and noted it was strange that Nora entered the house ahead of him, even though he was armed and she was visibly scared of a potential intruder. Pastor Mark Irwin testified that he and Jennifer were not together at the time of the crime and that their breakup had been mutual. He reiterated that he was asleep at his home, 90 minutes away from the crime scene during the incident. He admitted to calling Jennifer but hung up before she could answer, realizing it was too late to be calling. One of Nora's aunts testified for the prosecution, mentioning a heated argument between Jennifer and Nora about Nora's drug use and partying lifestyle just a week before the murder. Nora's uncle also testified, discussing Nora's supposed interest in Jennifer's life insurance policy. Nora later said this statement hurt the most, as she loved her uncle dearly. After questioning 45 witnesses over 9 days, the prosecution rested. During closing arguments, the defense accused the authorities of conducting an incompetent investigation and urged the jury to prioritize forensic evidence over circumstantial evidence. However, on February 21, 2009, after 9 hours of deliberation, the jury found Nora guilty of second-degree murder, a lesser charge than initially brought but still severe for a young woman who maintained her innocence. But the story was far from over. On February 26th, 5 days after the verdict and a month before the sentencing hearing, the prosecution submitted a state notice regarding the omission of a statement related to the testimony of Andrew Hommick. The friend who had placed Nora at the crime scene between 4 and 5 a.m. attached to this notice was a copy of Andrew's third statement. This was a handwritten note he had given to the police on June 13, 2005, approximately a week after his first 2 statements. In this third statement, written on the back of a letter addressed to one of his roommates, Andrew recounted a completely different version of events from the early hours of June 5th. He remembered going out with 3 friends and meeting another at a cinema near Nora's house. After leaving there, they went to a party, and during this time, Nora called one of the young men's phones looking for Andrew, as he had left his phone elsewhere. Andrew said they stayed at the party for a while but left when one of their friends tried to start a fight. He mentioned they had taken ecstasy. Around 3:57 a.m., Andrew and another friend wanted to go to a strip club. They stopped for gas and eventually decided to go home. Shortly after, they fell asleep. Nora's defense team filed a motion for a new trial, citing numerous issues, including the state's failure to disclose Andrew's third statement, which they argued violated her right to a fair trial. The trial court denied Nora's request for a new trial, and on March 27, 2009, she was sentenced to 20 years and 9 months in prison. However, her legal team did not stop fighting for justice. In 2012, they filed a motion with the Court of Criminal Appeals, which again ruled in favor of the prosecution, upholding Nora's conviction and sentence. Soon after, a new appeal was filed with the Tennessee Supreme Court. On August 22, 2014, after Nora had spent nearly a decade in prison, they finally secured approval for a new trial. According to the defense lawyer, this was the first case in Tennessee where a conviction was overturned due to 12 instances of constitutional misconduct. The court concluded that the prosecutor had violated a legal norm when she directly addressed Nora during her closing arguments, demanding that she tell the court exactly where she had been on the night of the crime. The first episode of misconduct and the second was that the prosecution withheld potentially exculpatory evidence from the defense by not disclosing Andrew's third statement, which contradicted his earlier testimony and statements. In January 2015, after a 5-month delay, the prosecution agreed to hand over Nora's case to the district attorney's office of a neighboring district. In May of that year, the new prosecutor offered Nora a deal: a reduced sentence if she pled guilty to manslaughter. On May 20th, Nora entered an Alfred plea, where a defendant maintains their innocence but acknowledges that the prosecution has enough evidence to convict them. Although this meant that the true perpetrator who killed her mother would never be found, as Nora would be legally held responsible, she accepted the deal. By then, 28 years old, Nora said in later statements that she had lost faith in the judicial system. The new deal reduced her sentence to 15 years, but with time already served in good behavior credits, she would be released in just over a year. Facing a new trial, there was no certainty about how long it would take to organize or if a new jury would find her innocent. In August 2016, at 29 years old, Nora was released from prison, still proclaiming her innocence. A friend of her mother invited Nora to live with her after her release. Shortly after her release, she decided to move to Nashville with a woman she had met in prison and formed a romantic relationship with. Despite the challenges of finding housing as ex-convicts, they managed to rent a nice apartment with lots of greenery and open spaces around it. In March 2017, the prosecutor, after facing state charges of ethical violations, accepted a private reprimand and admitted that an error had been made during Nora's trial. Meanwhile, the dispute between Nora and her family continued. That same year, she reached a private settlement with her aunts, resolving the inheritance issue. Having completed her studies in prison, Nora began applying to various universities while working as a receptionist at an auto repair shop. She expressed a desire to work to help women in prison. Nina Morrison from the Innocence Project agreed to represent Nora, aiming to use advances in DNA studies from the past decade to determine who really killed her mother. As of now, no results have been announced. Meanwhile, Nora continues to rebuild her life after spending her formative years in prison. She maintains her innocence and has appeared on several programs discussing her experience.
Skyler came out and I tried to hold her and she's breathing. She doesn't have a heartbeat.
So now, what do you do when you realize that she's not going to make it?
I have to bury her. I couldn't tell anybody.
Kim and Scott Richardson had a happy marriage, and their love and commitment brought their firstborn Skyler into the world on March 9, 1999. Later, they welcomed Jackson. Both children grew up in a peaceful environment. Weekends were family bonding times at home. Neighbors often saw them in their backyard, where Kim and Scott would grill food and work in the garden. Skyler and Jackson enjoyed playing with the family dogs, their laughter filling the air. Family celebrations, including birthdays, holidays, and graduations, took place around bonfires in the yard, which had witnessed countless joyful moments. It was a refuge of peace. No one could have imagined that in this backyard, amidst the Richardson family's happiness, an unutterable secret was buried. As Skyler grew older, weight and diet, issues that sometimes hide behind a seemingly perfect facade, played a central role in her life. These concerns became her obsession, leading to unexpected and painful situations. For Kim, the impact of these issues was undeniable. Her worry began in Skyler's early adolescence when her daughter already showed signs of eating disorders. At 12 years old, Skyler was obsessed with calories, refusing to buy gum because it added 5 calories to her diet. She attended high school in Ohio, excelling as a cheerleader. Being a cheerleader required her to be small and agile, traits she had, making her a perfect flyer. This role involved performing aerial stunts and holding complex poses for a few seconds before returning to the ground. However, the pressure to stay thin marked the beginning of Skyler's struggle with her weight. Her obsession with not gaining even a gram led to dangerous behaviors like induced vomiting, but when the cheerleading season ended, Skyler would binge eat. She then subjected herself to severe fasting periods. Discussing her weight was a taboo topic in the family, and Skyler's extremely reserved nature made addressing the issue difficult. The Richardsons sought professional help, including doctors, therapists, and nutritionists, but no intervention seemed to ease her suffering. Skyler was diagnosed with body dysmorphia, a disorder characterized by an obsession with perceived physical flaws. Amid her dissatisfaction with herself, she became increasingly reserved and kept numerous secrets, deeply worrying her parents. However, from the outside, everything seemed perfect at home. Skyler was seen as a beautiful and popular young woman during her high school years, excelling as a cheerleader and radiating vitality and joy in her school community. Her younger brother Jackson was on the football team at the same school, which contributed to the Richardson family's reputation as exemplary. In late July 2016, just before her senior year of high school, Skyler started a relationship with a friend's cousin, but it ended quickly. However, in January 2017, she found a new love, Brandon, a junior at her school. Skyler seemed happy and even appeared to be gaining weight, which gave her family hope. This change suggested that Skyler had her eating disorder under control. Her choice of a form-fitting dress for prom and her healthy appearance increased her parents' confidence in her well-being. In March, Skyler even went on a family vacation, wearing a two-piece bikini showing some curves. Skyler and Brandon's relationship seemed to be going well, and her mother's concerns led her to address a sensitive topic: pregnancy. Kim wanted Skyler to take measures to protect herself, so she took her to the gynecologist in April. At this point, Skyler was 18 years old, so she went into the exam room alone. What should have been a routine visit for a contraceptive prescription turned traumatic for Skyler. Her tears as she left the office indicated something troubling, but Kim assumed it was due to it being her first visit, which can be emotional and somewhat invasive for a reserved girl like her daughter. Little did her mother know that the cause of her tears was a shocking revelation. The doctor informed Skyler that she was pregnant, and not just newly pregnant. She was already 8 months along. Skyler desperately asked the doctor to keep this secret as her parents couldn't know. 9 days after the gynecologist visit on May 5, 2017, Skyler attended prom with Brandon. Despite being in her advanced pregnancy, her form-fitting dress fit her surprisingly well. It's worth noting that she had tried on the same dress in February, and it fit the same 3 months later. Apparently, she hadn't gained any weight in those 90 days, which is highly unusual for someone so far along in pregnancy. Perhaps that's why no one noticed the secret that was about to change her life forever. Less than 48 hours after attending prom, nature took its course, and it was time for the baby to be born. In the early hours of May 7th, Skyler gave birth to a small baby girl in the bathroom of the Richardson home. The newborn, apparently lifeless, became a dark secret that Skyler feared her parents would discover. In a panic, she decided to bury the baby in the backyard of their home. No one knew about this incident. In the weeks that followed, Skyler continued her life, outwardly acting as if nothing had happened. She didn't tell anyone about the tragic event that haunted her. In July 2017, she visited her gynecologist again and asked for a contraceptive prescription. As expected, the doctor asked what had happened with her pregnancy. She replied that her baby had been stillborn and that she had buried the body in the backyard of her family's home. unbeknownst to her, revealing this secret-set justice in motion. The police received a concerning call from a doctor who reported that after a gynecology and obstetrics consultation, a patient had given birth at home and buried the baby in the backyard. This call triggered a series of events that shook the Richardson family to its core. Kim and Scott were taken aback when the police arrived at their door on July 14, 2017. It was a sunny summer day, and Skyler was at her grandmother's pool, enjoying happy moments with her boyfriend and cousins. She had no idea they were coming for her. The family was entirely unaware of the gravity of the situation when the police contacted them. According to Scott's later statements, the police assured them that they only wanted to talk to Skyler about something she might have witnessed and insisted she was not in any trouble. Trusting those words, Scott took his daughter to the police station without proper legal representation, an action he would later consider one of the biggest mistakes of his life. On that same July 14th, when Scott accompanied his daughter to the police station, he had no idea that she had been hiding such a dark secret. At the station, the officers asked him to wait outside since Skyler was an adult. Inside an interrogation room, a police officer read Skyler her rights and began pressuring her to reveal what had happened with her baby.
So just kind of help me, walk through this. So what did you do? I guess, is your bedroom upstairs or bathroom upstairs? Okay, so you had to walk downstairs?
I had to clean myself up a little.
Are you carrying her?
Yes.
Did you go into the garage, or do you have an outdoor shed where you have a shovel?
My garage.
The family was about to face a crisis that would impact their lives in unimaginable ways. In the small interrogation room, Skyler finally shared the truth with the investigators.
Please, just be honest, what's gonna happen?
I don't know, okay? I'm in here observing. No. You're not going to jail. No.
No, and I'm not going to.
Just relax, okay? Listen, just relax, okay?
I don't want to go to jail.
I know you don't. Just relax,
I don't have to go to jail, though, right?
Listen, I understand that you're sorry, and I understand that you're upset, and I understand that you didn't want this to happen, okay? Just take some deep breaths, okay? Things will be okay.
I don't have to go to jail.
You're not going to jail.
In the early hours of May 7th, Skyler faced the unimaginable alone in her bathroom.
She gave birth to a baby who showed no signs of life. She held the newborn for hours, hoping for a miracle that never came. Resigned to the heartbreaking reality and ensuring not to wake her family, she quietly buried her daughter in a makeshift grave in their backyard using a small garden trowel. During a tense interrogation that followed, the investigator eventually disclosed to Skyler's parents, Scott and Kim, the grave reason for their daughter's questioning. Shocked by the news and unable to comprehend how they had missed the signs of her pregnancy, they listened as Skyler shared the baby's name, Annabelle, and revealed the brief relationship with the father, a cousin of a friend from the previous summer. This revelation devastated her mother, Kim, who later expressed her anguish over the pain Skyler had endured alone. As the family absorbed this new reality, investigators were already moving towards their home to dig deeper into the case, unbeknownst to them. The small town quickly buzzed with the news as police activity spiked in an area unaccustomed to such attention, drawing national media to the story of the troubled young cheerleader. That same day, authorities exhumed the remains of baby Annabelle for forensic examination. After enduring over 5 hours of grueling questions at the station, Skyler and her parents were allowed to go home. However, the respite was short-lived. 6 days later, the investigators returned with unsettling news from the autopsy. There were signs of charring on Annabelle's bones, suggesting she had been burned, which led them to suspect homicidal violence. On July 20th, 2017, during a second intense interview without her legal or parental support, Skyler was directly accused by police of killing and burning her baby. Throughout the interview, she steadfastly refuted the allegations, denying any use of heat or fire 17 times, and insisting 29 times that Annabelle was stillborn, maintaining her innocence against the grave charges laid before her.
Did you hear any cries after? Or did you hear any little cry? Okay.
Under the intense pressure of the interrogation, Skyler eventually changed her story, admitting that she might have partially burned the baby's body. When asked if the baby had made any noises at birth, she hesitantly mentioned that there might have been a sound. After an hour of intense questioning, the detectives decided they had enough to arrest her and charged her with reckless homicide, suspecting the baby had suffocated. Skyler was released on bail, but this was just the beginning of her legal battles. The prosecutor publicly laid out the charges: aggravated murder, which could lead to a life sentence, involuntary manslaughter, child endangerment, and abuse of a corpse. He argued that Skyler's actions were driven by her family's desire to maintain a perfect facade. Despite these heavy accusations, Skyler's parents, Kim and Scott, remained determined to clear her name with the help of their lawyers. Scott voiced his frustration over how the police had misled them from the beginning, telling them Skyler wasn't in trouble, only to detain her and search their home for evidence once they brought her to the station. Kim described the ordeal as a nightmare, noting how Skyler's arrest reignited her struggles with eating disorders and psychological stress. The legal drama attracted intense media scrutiny and public speculation, resulting in a gag order, although by then the Richardsons were already facing widespread criticism and hostility. Online and outside their home, the family endured harsh criticism, protests, and threats, feeling under constant surveillance and harassed by people who distorted their images online. Amid this turmoil, they hired experienced defense attorneys who contended that Skyler's confession was coerced. The case took a twist when the pathologist who initially reported charring on the baby's remains withdrew her statement, confirming there was no evidence of burning. Despite this new evidence, the prosecutor stood firm on the charges, insisting on the validity of Skyler's initial admissions during the interrogation. However, the defense succeeded in getting Skyler placed under house arrest. At home, surrounded by books and her dogs, she tried to find some peace under a pine tree where her parents had placed an angel ornament at the burial site of her baby, whom she called Angel. In a reflective interview, Scott explained that from Skyler's perspective, she was handling the sudden and tragic event the best she could, believing the baby was stillborn. He detailed how she tenderly placed the baby in the ground and marked the spot with a flower. As time passed, her dreams of attending the University of Cincinnati had to be put on hold. The uncertainty of her future weighed heavily on her and her family. However, the prosecution viewed this as her undergoing the justice process that was deemed necessary, aiming to seek justice for the baby. The case itself was fraught with tension and division. Kim, Skyler's mother, voiced her frustrations with the legal process, feeling that the defense's points were completely disregarded by the prosecution, which she found to be exceedingly cold and dismissive. The prosecution maintained that an innocent life had been unjustly taken, and it was their duty to seek reparation. In July 2019, the case took an unexpected turn when the prosecutor offered Skyler a deal: drop the aggravated murder charge if she pleaded guilty to the remaining charges, thus avoiding a trial but still facing up to 15 years in prison. This proposal brought immense anguish to the Richardson family, but ultimately, the decision rested with Skyler. On one decisive Sunday morning, Skyler resolved not to plead guilty to crimes she maintained she did not commit. She chose to let a jury decide her fate at trial. 2 years after the distressing events, the trial began on September 3, 2019. The prosecution started with a startling revelation, quoting a text message from Skyler to her mother that exposed her troubled emotional state shortly after she secretly gave birth and buried the baby in the backyard. The prosecution also displayed a selfie Skyler had taken at the gym that same day, using these pieces to argue that Skyler had no intention of keeping the baby. Although proving the baby was born alive was a challenge, the prosecution contended that Skyler's own admissions during interrogation supported their case. Witnesses for the prosecution testified that Skyler had seen the baby's arms move and heard her make sounds, suggesting life. They also claimed Skyler might have inadvertently harmed the baby. Moreover, they accused her of trying to burn the baby's remains. Trey Johnson, presented as the baby's father, testified about their brief relationship and the unprotected sexual encounters they had. When it was time for the defense, Skyler's lawyers argued that she had been subjected to overly aggressive questioning, leading to a coerced confession. They disputed the assumption that she had attempted to burn her baby, noting that the forensic expert who initially supported this claim had later withdrawn it. They presented evidence of Skyler's significant weight fluctuations due to her long-standing battle with anorexia, which they claimed was exacerbated by her mother's pressure to remain thin. During the trial, the doctor who performed the autopsy testified that the baby died from homicidal violence of undetermined origin. Yet, under cross-examination, she admitted there was no physical evidence to support a live birth or that Skyler had directly caused harm to her child. Witnesses for the prosecution also acknowledged the lack of physical evidence of a live birth, with no trauma or burns found on the baby's remains. The defense stressed that the only evidence suggesting a live birth came from Skyler's statements, which they argued were the result of coercion by the police. An obstetrician also testified that he didn't believe the baby was alive at birth. He noted that the umbilical cord wasn't cut, he suggested that Skyler's eating disorder might have limited the baby's growth in the womb, possibly leading to a stillbirth or death shortly after birth. An expert on police questioning explained that some interrogation techniques can push people into false confessions, especially those who are more vulnerable to pressure. A clinical psychologist who talked to Skyler found she has a dependent personality disorder, which could make her more likely to give in to authority figures. The trial moved forward with both sides presenting their arguments and evidence. The defense attorney emphasized that Skyler is innocent until proven guilty, urging the jury to stand by her if they had any doubts about the baby's condition at birth. The prosecution argued that Skyler had ended a life to keep up appearances and should be held accountable. The trial was intense, and eventually, the jury had to decide Skyler's fate.
With regard to count one, we, the jury in the above captioned case, find the defendant, Brooke Skyler Richardson, not guilty of the offense of aggravated murder.
And on September 12th, 2019, after 4 hours, they ruled she wasn't guilty of the most serious charges, but did find her guilty of improperly handling the baby's remains, which could mean up to a year in jail. The Richardson family was relieved by the verdict, but had to wait until sentencing. The next day, Skyler spoke publicly for the first time in court, expressing regret and apologizing for the pain caused by her actions. During a victim impact statement, Trey Johnson's mother spoke about her deep loss, saying no words could fully express her anguish over her granddaughter Annabelle's death. The judge believed different choices by Skyler could have saved her daughter, but sentenced her to 3 years of probation instead of a harsher penalty. The trial and its aftermath deeply affected Skyler and her family, causing her significant stress and health issues. 2 months after being mostly acquitted, Skyler shared her feelings in an interview with Cosmopolitan magazine. She talked about her regrets and the burden of guilt she carries every day for not opening up sooner about her situation. She described the period as devastating and admitted to struggling with depression since the incident. Skyler shared that she named her baby Annabelle because she didn't know anyone else with that name. She visits Annabelle's grave every week to leave pink flowers and finds a bit of peace knowing her baby is at rest. During an interview, Skyler opened up about how the trial almost broke her and even made her think about ending her life. She admitted that living with the truth was incredibly hard, especially when it felt like everyone else thought differently. She also felt like she lost a part of herself during the trial and was scared that people saw her as guilty because of all the news coverage. Trey, Annabelle's dad, told the media that he was shocked by the case because he didn't know about the pregnancy beforehand. It hit him hard when he found out months later in 2018, especially learning about it through social media when everything went public. Trey's family deeply felt the loss, and after the trial, they gathered to mark 2 years since Annabelle's passing. This whole situation really affected everyone involved. They all dealt with a lot of emotions no matter how the court ruled. Over time, Skyler got help for her eating disorders, went to college, and worked at the law firm that represented her. Her probation ended almost 2 years early in 2020. The judge decided there was no need to keep an eye on her since the crime wasn't severe. She had no prior offenses, and she was busy with work and school. In Skyler's first TV interview, her parents talked about how the case impacted them and their daughter. They mentioned a special angel marker at Annabelle's gravesite, expressing how heartbreaking it all was and how sometimes being near the grave brought them a little comfort. They also revealed that Skyler was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, suffering from frequent panic attacks and nightmares that often kept her from sleeping in her own room. In 2022, Skyler's lawyers tried to seal the court records of her conviction to help her move on, arguing that the public didn't need to see them anymore. But the prosecutors disagreed, saying it would lessen how serious her actions were. The judge ultimately decided to restrict access to the records, siding with Skyler's need for privacy, which stirred up new debates. Gail Katz was born on March 8, 1956, in New York, USA. She was the first child of Manuel, an advertising executive, and Sylvia, who juggled managing the household and working in a hospital's emergency department. When Gail was just 2, her sister Elaine came along, and the two became inseparable. The family lived in Brooklyn until Gail was about 9, and then they moved to Long Island, where her brother Steve was born in 1970. Life in the Katz household was a bit rocky. Manuel had a strong personality and could be pretty tough on everyone, especially during arguments which often ended with days of silence despite sitting together for meals or watching TV. Gail was a star student and graduated from high school in 1973. She then went to the State University of New York in Albany. Despite her smarts, Gail struggled with insecurities and often felt down. Her love life was a roller coaster. She took breakups hard. After nearly 5 years at university, she grew disinterested in her studies, started experimenting with drugs, and even ended up in the hospital after a serious attempt on her life. Her parents were really worried about her and tried to help, but it usually ended in heated arguments. Hoping for a fresh start, her mom suggested she should try to settle down, ideally with a doctor, thinking it would give her a more stable and luxurious life. But Gail wasn't into that idea. Instead, she moved to Manhattan and joined a dance program at New York University. She was talented, but her lack of confidence got in the way, and she eventually dropped out. Not giving up, she then tried social work, but soon felt it wasn't right for her either. Gail returned to Albany and started exploring her artistic side by dating a musician. They experimented with music and choreography, but it wasn't quite the right fit. Then she met Amanda, a band member who played guitar and synthesizer. They clicked instantly, becoming close friends and trusted confidants. At this stage in her life, Gail faced a dilemma. She was torn between following her mother's advice to settle down with a professional partner or continuing to pursue her creative passions. In her search for clarity, Gail turned to a therapist, hoping to find guidance in making these life decisions. Despite the therapy sessions, she found it challenging to set a clear path for her future and defaulted to searching for a partner as a temporary solution to her indecision. By 1979, at 23 years old, Gail was doing odd jobs in Manhattan and spending her leisure time at a popular dance club in Albany. It was there, through Amanda, that she met Robert Bierenbaum, a charismatic recent medical school graduate who was a year older than her. The attraction was immediate, and they quickly developed a deep connection. Robert was born on July 22, 1955 in Newark, New Jersey, into a Jewish family. His father was a respected cardiologist, and his mother helped manage his thriving practice. The family lived in a prominent white house in West Orange, a short distance from Newark. Recognized for his intellect from a young age, Robert was the standout student in his science classes. At just 7, he was the youngest participant in an astronomy course at the planetarium in Manhattan, mingling with adults. During his adolescence, he also pursued artistic interests, taking lessons in piano and guitar. Robert attended high school in West Orange, excelling academically and frequently topping the honor roll. He aced his college entrance exams, scoring 800 points, a testament to his intellectual prowess. He enrolled at Albany Medical College and completed the typically 8-year program in just 5 years, thanks to his exceptional memory and self-confidence. Alongside his academic and artistic pursuits, Robert also engaged in judo, mastering various combat techniques, including those used to incapacitate an opponent, which hinted at a complex blend of interests and abilities in his character. Robert was also passionate about flying, and while studying medicine, he completed all the necessary courses to obtain his pilot's license for light aircraft. Furthermore, he dreamt of becoming the first Jewish astronaut. Robert could be described as the complete package. He was handsome, charming, well-educated, cultured, and sensitive. Besides his surgical residency, he was fluent in 5 languages, loved gourmet cooking, and enjoyed judo, skiing, playing guitar, and flying light aircraft. He had a charismatic personality, was extroverted, and spoke fluently. He was every woman's dream Prince Charming. Robert was known as a romantic among his close circle. Often he would invite the women he was courting to join him for short flights in his plane. Most were charmed by his allure and the marvelous experience of seeing everything from above. When Gail met Robert, her mother's advice echoed in her head, and she quickly concluded that he was the right person to start a family with. The couple went on several dates and flew through the clouds during their romantic flights. Robert became a great support for Gail, who came from a background filled with difficulties. His presence improved her self-esteem and made her feel more confident about herself. As time passed, their relationship grew stronger and became more intimate. Eventually, their love led them to formalize their engagement. Their bond was very solid, and their inner circle described it as something magical. Gail's parents were delighted with Robert, seeing him as the ideal husband for their daughter, not only because of his many attributes, but also because of his medical background. They believed a great future awaited them. However, as the saying goes, appearances can be deceiving, and behind his magical and attractive facade, Robert hid a sinister side. He was controlling, possessive, and prone to anger. Some people close to him had witnessed this side of him, which began to gradually show in his relationship with Gail. Initially, the changes in his behavior were almost imperceptible, but one day an incident occurred that revealed what Robert was capable of when overcome with rage. In a fit of jealousy, he attempted to drown Gail's cat in the toilet of their apartment. Fortunately, she arrived in time and managed to save the cat, which was still meowing in fear the next day. Overwhelmed by distress, Gail called her sister and told her what Robert had done. Together, they took the cat with the intention of bringing it to a shelter, as Gail thought it best to give it up for adoption. During this critical time, her sister took the opportunity to advise Gail to end the relationship and keep her pet. However, Gail loved Robert and was convinced that her love could change him, and that together they could be a happy couple. She believed it was just a matter of having patience and persevering. On August 29, 1982, after a brief engagement and just a month after the cat incident, Gail agreed to marry Robert. The young couple vowed eternal love in a beautiful ceremony held in a synagogue. Until the last minute, Elaine persistently asked her sister to distance herself from Robert, but Gail's response was always the same. She felt she had everything under control. Whenever Elaine brought up the subject, Gail insisted she didn't want to ruin the occasion. She reminded her that the wedding invitations had already been sent out and that all the preparations for the celebration were in place. Moreover, Gail often reiterated that she truly loved her fiancé and would do whatever was necessary to help him change. Gail failed to realize that she was normalizing certain behaviors that seemed harmless, but were actually warning signs of danger. For example, instead of choosing her own wedding dress, she wore the gown her mother-in-law had worn at her own wedding. Despite not liking it, she wore it to ingratiate herself with her, with Robert, and with the rest of his family. Unfortunately, contrary to Gail's expectations, her love was not enough to help her husband, and within a few months of marriage, the atmosphere at home had become very oppressive. Arguments became more frequent. The couple began to cross the boundaries of respect and entered into a love-hate relationship. Friends and family became aware of this situation and could see the excessive control Robert exerted over his wife. He decided on the hairstyle she should wear and her clothing. She had to do everything as he wanted. She was essentially subjected to her husband's decisions and had no voice of her own. According to some acquaintances, Gail began to feel uncomfortable in her own home. She spent a lot of time alone because Robert had long work hours at the hospital, but when they were together, problems arose. When he returned home, the doctor wanted to rest and not spend time with his wife. Gail, for her part, was disappointed. The doctor's salary did not allow her to have the lifestyle she thought she would enjoy, nor did she receive the attention she expected. Indeed, financial issues and the status of the couple were factors of conflict. Gail felt a bit more at ease when her in-laws leased a new apartment in a prestigious area of Manhattan, to which they moved in January 1983. Around this time, Robert insisted that his wife return to university. His efforts paid off, and she decided to resume her studies in psychology. For a brief period, the glamorous apartment, as well as the academic focus, helped Gail feel more settled. That was a time when things functioned better for the couple, but unfortunately, the calm did not last long and was soon replaced by intense arguments. Neighbors of the Bierenbaums were witnesses to the situation. A person living in the apartment below commented that they did not need to check a calendar to know what day of the week it was because, almost religiously, the couple would have heated arguments every Sunday. On that day, The only day both were home at the same time, the differences between the spouses became more irreconcilable and cohabitation increasingly difficult. They then decided it was time to seek professional help and scheduled an appointment with a coupled therapist. The therapist first met with Robert and, at the end of the session, told him he could leave. She then spoke with Gail and advised her to distance herself from her husband because her life was in danger. Despite warnings, Gail didn't take the advice seriously and brushed off the recommendations. After their sessions, the therapist decided to refer Gail and her husband Robert to a psychiatrist named Michael. By November 1983, Michael had met with them multiple times, both individually and together. He even talked to their parents and quickly figured out that Robert could be a real danger to Gail. He strongly suggested that Gail should leave her husband to avoid serious harm or even worse, but again, she didn't buy into what the expert said. She couldn't see Robert as a threat and chose to stay with him. Michael was so sure about his diagnosis and what needed to be done that he wrote up a document. It laid out all he knew about Robert's personality and the risks of staying together. He also included a note in the document to clear himself from any responsibility if anything bad happened to Gail. He tried to get her to sign it, but she wouldn't. Even though she ignored the advice from both doctors, Gail talked about what went on in the therapy sessions with several friends and her sister. They all thought she should listen to the experts and break it off with Robert, but she didn't listen. In the next few months, things between Gail and Robert just drifted along. Robert was busy with long hospital hours. Gail was caught up with her classes and therapy, and their weekends were filled with arguments and money worries. On July 7, 1985, it was Robert's nephew's birthday party in New Jersey. Robert went to his sister's house for the celebration alone, telling everyone that he and Gail had had a fight, which was why she didn't come with him. The party went on as planned. After the party, Robert made a quick stop at the home of Dr. Scott, one of his good friends. Robert explained to Scott that he was distressed because he had tried to reach his wife several times through the apartment line, but she did not answer the calls. He also mentioned the heated argument they had that morning, after which Gail left and had not been seen since. After leaving Scott's house, Robert returned to his apartment. There, he made several calls trying to gather information about Gail, as he found the place completely dark and empty. Among the people he contacted was one of his wife's former professors, to whom he explained the day's events. The academic advised him to report to the police and to ask the building's doorman if he had seen his wife. He then shared the same information with his wife's relatives. On the evening of July 8, 1985, almost a full day after he got home and started calling around about his wife's disappearance, Robert went to the police station. He seemed genuinely worried as he explained the situation. He told the officers that after their argument the previous day, Gail left their apartment at around 11 a.m. She hadn't come back by the time he left for a family event at 5:30 p.m. and was still missing when he returned later that night. He said Gail was dressed casually, possibly heading to Central Park. Since Robert was the last person known to have seen Gail, the detective asked him for every detail he could remember to help find her. Among other things, Robert mentioned that Gail had a history of depression and had once attempted suicide, which made him worried she might have hurt herself again. For the next 2 days, the police conducted an intense search for Gail, knowing the first hours were critical. However, Robert wasn't much help to the authorities. Although they left several messages for him starting on July 8th, it wasn't until the following day that Robert got back to them. During that call, he asked about the investigation's progress and agreed to meet with the detective 3 days later to go over everything about the day Gail disappeared. By then, the police were starting to suspect something was off and began to doubt Robert's story. No one could confirm seeing Gail leave the building on the day she vanished. Besides the police efforts, Gail's friends and acquaintances were also desperately trying to locate her. They actively searched and handed out posters with her description, all wondering where she could be and what might have happened. At the time, Gail's sister Elaine was 27 and was studying hard for her final law school exams. Initially, she tried to stay calm, but as time passed without any word from Gail, anxiety overwhelmed her. It seemed out of character for Gail to just vanish without contacting her or anyone else in the family. Elaine was also worried because Gail had missed important appointments with her patients, which she needed for her psychology degree and her own therapy sessions. As days went by, Elaine became increasingly convinced that Robert had something to do with her sister's disappearance. This suspicion wasn't just based on how he acted after Gail went missing, but also on things Gail had confided about her troubled marriage. Gail's parents sat down with their children and one of the detectives for a crucial meeting. During this session, Elaine shared some disturbing incidents involving her sister and Robert. She described a time when Robert caught Gail smoking on the balcony. Instead of just scolding her, he violently grabbed her by the neck and squeezed until she passed out. Gail reported this 4 days later, but eventually dropped the case, and the police didn't pursue it seriously either. She also recalled a dinner at a restaurant where Robert fed Gail a bite and then unsettlingly tried to feed Elaine in the same way, which she found inappropriate and strange. As Elaine detailed these acts of violence and excessive control, Gail's parents grew increasingly convinced that their son-in-law was responsible for their daughter's disappearance. Furthermore, during a visit to Gail and Robert's Manhattan apartment, the family noticed all of Gail's belongings were still there: her purse with her documents, payment cards, cigarettes, and keys. It seemed impossible that she would leave voluntarily without these essentials. This oversight made it clear to the Katz family that Robert might have forgotten to remove these items. Unbeknownst to them at that moment, the search for the truth behind Gail's disappearance would turn into a relentless challenge filled with intrigue and deceptive half-truths. The family and Gail's close friends made several trips to the couple's apartment, creating distractions to keep Robert occupied while they searched the place for any clues or suspicious items. They even went through the trash bins of the apartment complex, hoping to find something that might lead them to Gail or implicate the doctor. Despite all their searching, Gail's family and friends never found any concrete evidence. Wanting to leave no stone unturned, Wayne, Gail's cousin, decided to reach out to two of her past romantic interests who might know something that could help the case. He first met with a psychologist who had dated Gail during a 6-month break from Robert. This man hadn't heard from Gail in days and shared that she had been thinking seriously about leaving Robert to marry him. He felt that if Gail had chosen to leave with someone, it would likely have been him. Next, Wayne contacted a banker who had been involved with Gail before her time with Ken. He was also in the dark about her current whereabouts, mentioning it had been a long while since he last heard from her. For those who loved Gail, fearing the worst seemed inevitable, but they still clung to hope that she might be found alive. However, as days turned into weeks, that hope dimmed even though their resolve to discover the truth remained strong. They kept a close watch on Robert, believing he might eventually slip up and reveal something or make a mistake that could lead them to the truth. Knowing he was under suspicion, Robert hired a lawyer named Scott to safeguard his interests. Tensions between the Katz and Bierenbaum's families grew, leading to virtually no communication between them. Gail's relatives were frustrated with Robert's parents, who had suggested to the police that Gail might have run off with someone else or even taken her own life. The Bierenbaums, on the other hand, were upset knowing the Katz suspected Robert was involved in Gail's disappearance. Months after Gail vanished with no significant leads, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office took over the case, assigning a chief investigator named Andy. He decided to explore a new angle, Robert's interest in flying. Upon investigating the flight club where Robert rented planes, Andy discovered that on July 7, 1985, Robert had taken out a plane and altered the logbook to show he was flying not just on that day but also on the following day. This led Andy to hypothesize that Robert might have killed Gail, then flown her body over the Atlantic Ocean to dispose of it. The fact that Robert had never mentioned this flight during police interviews made this theory seem all the more plausible. However, the district attorney's office informed the Katz family that without Gail's body and in the absence of conclusive evidence, they could not press charges against Robert. From that point on, the young doctor continued his life as an innocent person with nothing to fear. In February 1987, a new forensic search was conducted with the goal of gathering criminalistic evidence from the aircraft Robert had rented and the car his father had borrowed the week his wife disappeared. During this investigation, luminol, a chemical substance that detects traces of blood on surfaces, was used. Despite these efforts, the authorities found no evidence that the aircraft or the car had been used to transport the remains of a person. In May 1989, nearly 4 years after Gail vanished, a torso was discovered in the waters off Staten Island. To identify it, forensic experts compared old chest x-rays of Gail with the remains. The technician concluded it was indeed Gail's torso, but noted that, according to the study, the remains had only been in the water for about 2 to 3 months. This raised questions about where Gail had been all those years, suggesting she might have been alive until just before the remains were found. For Gail's family, the discovery was heartbreaking but brought some form of closure. After years of uncertainty, they were finally able to hold a funeral service and create a memorial for their beloved Gail. A few months after the funeral, Gail's mother passed away and was buried next to her daughter. The prolonged tragedy and the endless questions had taken a heavy toll on her. Meanwhile, Robert seemed to move on with his life with little outward grief. He continued to socialize and date, frequently attending events in the Hamptons, where wealthy New York families gathered. Eventually, he started a serious relationship with Sandy Schiff, a criminal lawyer from New York who saw him as hardworking, sweet, gentle, and devoted. Sandy believed Robert was very open with her, having shared everything about Gail's disappearance right from the start. Their relationship, which was free from arguments or fear, lasted about 3 years. In the early 90s, Robert moved to the Bahamas to open his own plastic surgery clinic, marking 5 years since Gail's disappearance. Shortly after relocating, he began dating Stephanie Youngblood, a chiropractor. She described their first year together as wonderful. They shared many interests and trips, including a memorable skiing trip to Argentina. The couple also balanced their medical careers with adventure and fun. Later, Robert joined Flying Doctors, a group that transported medical personnel to provide care, particularly to children in Mexico. As their relationship developed, Stephanie became more curious about Robert's past. Eventually, she discovered he had concealed his previous marriage and Gail's disappearance. Robert explained he preferred not to discuss it and asked her to keep this information confidential, claiming it wasn't public knowledge. Despite his vague explanations and scant details, Stephanie chose to believe what Robert told her and continued the relationship. Despite her initial reluctance, Stephanie soon found herself unable to ignore the glaring issues in her relationship with Robert. His temperament flared up publicly on a couple of occasions, leading to outright attacks on Stephanie. After a particularly alarming incident, she convinced him to see a specialist. It didn't take many sessions before the therapist pointed out Robert's volatile nature and advised Stephanie to keep her distance, citing her safety. Her gut feeling and the professional's advice prompted Stephanie to end the relationship. Meanwhile, the Katz family suffered yet another loss in 1994. It had been 5 years since Gail's burial and her mother's death when Manuel, the family's patriarch, passed away. The only consolation for the family was that both parents had lived to see their daughter laid to rest. The next year, a decade after Gail's disappearance, Robert started a new chapter in Las Vegas with Janet Chalet, an obstetrician and gynecologist. Their relationship moved quickly to an engagement. Around this time, Robert secured a copy of Gail's death certificate in New York. While he had mentioned his missing wife to Janet, he hadn't disclosed the suspicions that surrounded his past. Confronted with the death certificate, Robert shared more details about Gail, which Janet accepted, moving forward with their wedding plans. In 1997, as forensic technology advanced, the district attorney's office decided to re-examine Gail's case, which had been filed away as unsolved. They exhumed the remains for new tests, which shockingly revealed that the remains weren't Gail's. A year after this discovery, Robert and Janet married and relocated to Mayville, North Dakota, where he had accepted a new job. Their joy grew when they welcomed a daughter in 1998. Robert, having always wanted a family, cherished his role as a father. Since becoming a lawyer, Elaine had committed herself to uncovering what happened to her sister. Working closely with Michael, the psychiatrist who had treated Gail, she vowed to keep pursuing the truth. As a lawyer who often represented children in divorce cases, Elaine's professional skills aided her personal quest. She continually monitored Robert, investigated various theories about Gail's fate, and periodically shared her findings through articles in the press, maintaining hope that the truth would eventually emerge. Elaine actively reached out to various media outlets, including radio stations and television networks, understanding the significant impact they could have in keeping her sister's case in the public eye. She also communicated with the residents of the Manhattan building where Gail had lived with Robert, as well as the hospitals where Robert was affiliated, ensuring that the community saw him as a suspect in Gail's disappearance. As the investigation gained momentum, the police revisited several witnesses, some for the second time. A few women who had dated Robert after Gail vanished came forward to revise their earlier statements, offering a more candid perspective that added depth to Robert's profile. One key witness was a woman who had a romantic relationship with Robert starting in September 1985, just months after Gail's disappearance. She moved into the Manhattan apartment and shared with the police her belief that Robert knew how to dispose of a body by dropping it from an airplane, a theory the investigators were already considering. This aligned with the altered flight logs, which Robert had changed to make it look like he flew the day after Gail went missing. The alteration was conspicuous, done in a different color ink. With new evidence, including the altered flight log and testimony from Dr. Michael Stone regarding Robert's psychological profile, prosecutors charged Robert with second-degree murder on December 8, 1999. At the age of 45, the now prominent plastic surgeon appeared in court alongside his lawyer and wife, pleading not guilty. Bail was set at $500,000, which his father paid, allowing him to stay free during the trial. As the trial date approached, it seemed Robert's luck was dwindling. The trial would be overseen by a judge known as the Iron Princess for her empathy towards cases involving female victims. Recognizing the formidable judge, Robert's lawyer suggested bolstering their defense with a more experienced criminal defense attorney. A month before the hearing, the judge ruled that Gail's psychiatrists, who had warned her life was in danger, could not testify due to doctor-patient confidentiality rules. The trial kicked off in early October 2000. During the opening statements, prosecutors argued that the marriage between Robert and Gail had ended tragically in a fit of rage, leading Robert to murder Gail and dispose of her body from an aircraft. They stressed that while there was no physical evidence like a body or blood traces, the motive was clear and compelling. Throughout the trial, the prosecution painted a picture of a day when Gail intended to leave Robert, which, given his controlling nature, was deemed unforgivable by him. In contrast, the defense maintained that the prosecution's story was speculative and aimed merely to explain the disappearance of a woman whose body had never been found. They presented what they believed were logical, exculpatory explanations for Robert's behavior and inconsistencies over the years. Witnesses played crucial roles in shaping the narrative. A defense witness testified he saw Gail with another woman at a bagel shop on the day she vanished. His description of Gail's clothing matched what she wore that day, although not her physical appearance. Prosecutors challenged his credibility, suggesting his testimony was vital for the defense but unreliable. Similarly, a beauty salon owner who regularly styled Gail's hair testified about Gail seeking an apartment to move into alone, hinting at her marital problems. She also mentioned Gail's infidelities, noting Gail was very detailed when discussing her romantic life. The jury also heard about a letter from psychiatrist Michael Stone that detailed allegations of abuse, alongside witness statements about Gail's experiences with her controlling and violent husband. Additionally, the court examined the altered flight log, and the prosecution underscored Robert's inconsistent explanations to various people about Gail's fate, ranging from mental illness claims to alleged involvement in a botched drug deal, or that she had moved to California and was working as a waitress. Though the evidence was circumstantial, the deliberation ended with the jury convicting Robert of second-degree murder after 7 hours. Despite the conviction, Robert continued to proclaim his innocence. A month later, he was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison without the possibility of parole, bringing a somber conclusion to a lengthy and complex case. 15 years after Gail's disappearance, the person responsible had been convicted and was behind bars. Yet the case took a startling turn when, after 20 years in prison, Robert confessed to the crime. It was December 2020, 35 years since Gail had vanished. During a parole board meeting, Robert disclosed that he had ended his wife's life and disposed of her remains over the Atlantic Ocean. He detailed how a heated argument led to uncontrollable shouting, culminating in him strangling Gail to silence her. He then transported her body to a hangar, rented a plane, and dropped her into the ocean, later describing his actions as an immature loss of control. Daniel Bibb, one of the prosecuting attorneys, was stunned by the confession, having thought it unlikely that Robert would ever admit to the crime. Gail's brothers felt a complex mix of emotions. Robert's admission provided a grim confirmation of their suspicions. Though they would never bring Gail back, they felt that she could finally rest in peace, knowing justice had been served. This tragic story underscores how Gail's hopeful belief that love could change her partner ultimately led to her demise.